Okay, it's 4:02, so we're a smidge behind here, so we'll get the meeting started. And I will begin by saying that the City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for council, standing or advisory committee meetings and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-2489, extension 2425. To make a request specific to this meeting, please contact pec@london.ca. And with that, I will look to committee to see if there are any disclosures of conflict. I'm not seeing any, so we'll go to consent. We have a number of consent items. We can move them all unless Councillor Turner would like something pulled.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I notice on 2.4, Mr. Wallace has requested an opportunity to speak to this item, so perhaps we can pull that.
Okay, we will do that. Anything else? Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, Madam Chair. I don't want to pull anything, but I would like to make comments on 2.3 and 2.5.
Perfect. So let's move everything except for 2.4. I need a mover for that. Councillor Kayabaga, seconded by Councillor Turner. And I will call the vote. So, sorry, you're right. No calling of the vote. Uncall the vote. And Councillor Hopkins had some comments. My apologies, Councillor. Go ahead.
Thank you. First of all, I want to speak to 2.3, which is the update on the subdivision ambassador role in development. Report and read, and I know that we as a city probably are one of the only cities that have a subdivision ambassador, and given Ward 9 is a ward of subdivisions, I have been working with our ambassador throughout the past number of years and really appreciate the work that staff have been doing in this area. I think it's really important. One of the challenges I have as a councillor is how we close that loop. And I think this is an opportunity with the subdivision ambassador of a way we can close the loop, close concerns, close questions from the community, and also to provide information. I do have a number of questions as we move forward, but it's more about the new mapping and how that's going to take place. I think that's another great opportunity that we can really provide the community on, especially when it comes to roads that have been assumed or not by the city and subdivisions and parts thereof. So there's a lot of information we can provide the community. I'm really pleased that we're going along those lines. We're also, I think there's been a lot of improvement. I've seen it. I'm very appreciated of staff's work in this area, and look forward to seeing what staff will come back as well with other ways that we can do it, and looking into other municipalities and see what they're doing as well.
Councillor, I believe you had another item that you wanted to speak to.
Yes, I do, and that is 2.5, and this is just a removal of a holding provision, but I think it's really important to note at 1959 Warncliffe Road South that it is a removal of a holding provision. I know I've had some concerns from the community, and I'd like to be transparent here that we've already approved this application. It is a removal of a holding provision, but sometimes when we do these things, we're not giving the information that the community needs to know that this application has been approved. And it's in an area in Ward 9 where there's a lot of development. And the challenges of development are how we balance growth and infrastructure. And I think that's what I'm hearing from the community is it's not about not developing. It's how can we do it a different way when we develop in areas that create changes in our infrastructure, how we move around, our schools, things like that. It's something that I just wanted to make a comment on this development being it has already been approved. it's only 104 units, 104 units with mixed uses. It's not just single families. This is multi-mixed uses too, which is, I think, also important. The challenges, again, are going to be how we move around the area, and I just wanted to just make those comments. Thank you.
I just have a question from the chair, and it's about item 2.8, which is a report from the city clerk requesting a council resolution under section 45, 1.4 of the Planning Act. So this is under consent. If this passes to city staff, does this automatically grant the ability of the applicant to go to the Committee of Adjustment? Is that one of those?
Yes, Madam Chair. If this goes to council next week and council passes a resolution to allow the applicant to make an application to the Committee of Adjustment, yes.
Thank you. I just caught that at the last second. So I just wanted to flag that for committee, and if anybody has any concerns about that, Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a really quick question. Is relief from maximum density something that is normally able to be granted by Committee of Adjustment? It's not something I'm normally familiar with going to.
If it meets the 4 tests, it can be considered, excuse me, through you, Madam Chair, if it does meet the 4 tests under the Planning Act for considering minor variance application, and one of the tests is consistency with the official plan, then it can be considered through a minor variance process.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other comments or questions. With that, I now will call the question on those consent items.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
So we will move to the scheduled items. The first one is 3.1 of, sorry, you're right, item number 2.4. So we have a delegation request, I believe. Did you want to move that, Councillor?
Madam Chair, I notice Mr. Wallace from London Development Institute's requested delegation status, the ability to speak to this item, so I would move that we grant him that opportunity.
Seconded by the mayor. And with that, I'll call the question. I'm just trying to move too quickly here, so I'll slow things down.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
So, Mr. Wallace, you have 5 minutes. You know the drill. I think we know who you are. You can go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, committee members, and thank you, Councillor Turner, for moving my ability to speak to a consent item. I appreciate that. It will be very quick. First of all, welcome back and Happy New Year. And my New Year started off very well. I was telling Councillor Hopkins yesterday I became a grandfather for the 2nd time, so that's a nice way to start 2020. I'm here to speak to the item that you have in front of you, that 2.4, the appointments to the Urban Design Peer Review Panel. And first of all, we'd like to say congratulations to those who are getting the appointment. You did have a fairly long list of people who applied for those jobs, which is very impressive. The only other thing that came to our mind when we saw the list was that we could be of help in the future. And it's one thing we didn't talk about when we were having a review of the terms of reference, is that I know that the professional organizations like the professional planners, professional architects, are all contacted that these openings come available. But LDI would like to put their name on the list as an organization that's contacted through our network, that we might be able to find people who are London-based that would be able to serve on this committee in future openings. That was really all we wanted to make sure that you knew that we thought this was a good process, that we're happy, that we think that you've done a good job. The city has done a good job in terms of attracting quality candidates for this position, and that we're there to help in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. So I just want to comment briefly on 2.4 myself, and echo the comments that Mr. Wallace made, that some great candidates, some really good applications in our report here. I would like to see a little bit more diversity, and I know you're dealing with the candidates that you're getting, and maybe LDI can help to attract. We have some amazing planners at the City of London, male and female, men and women, and they're excellent planners all around, and I would like to see that better reflected on the panel. That's just my personal feelings. If anybody else has no comment or questions about this item, then I think we need a mover and a seconder. Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Helmer, so we can vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Now we can move to the scheduled items. Item 3.1 is a public participation meeting regarding a demolition request of a heritage and a heritage alteration permit application at 88 Blackfriars Street. Before we begin, I just would like to look to the gallery to see if there is anybody from the public here for this specific item. Yes, there is. Okay. So I'll go to Mr. Gagnon, and first, before I go to Mr. Gagnon, I will go to committee to open the PPM. I'm having a hard time in 2020. My apologies. Councillor Turner is moving that, and Councillor Hopkins seconded that. So we'll vote on opening the public participation meeting.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
I'm not new at this. I've been doing it for a month, remember? Although I think we only had one meeting in December. Okay, so the PPM is open. Now I will go to Mr. Gagnon for a staff presentation.
Thank you and good afternoon, committee and chair. This is a demolition request as well as a heritage alteration permit application for the property at 88 Blackfriars Street in the Blackfriars Petersville Heritage Conservation District. The existing built heritage resource is identified as a contributing resource in the Heritage Conservation District Plan, meaning it contributes to the cultural heritage value of Blackfriars Petersville. The existing building was built in about 1876, and it's a side hull plan cottage you can see pictured there. Demolition is, in any of our heritage conservation districts, a challenging proposition. Within the Blackfriars Petersville Heritage Conservation District, one of its goals is avoiding the unnecessary demolition of identified heritage resources, or contributing resources. Policy 751D is very specific in its direction in terms of considering demolition of contributing resources, requiring a very rigorous process by which alternatives are considered before demolition can be supported. To achieve this, a heritage impact assessment was submitted by the property owner, who is here tonight if there are any questions for him, and it's appended to the staff report. In this, it found that the retention, repair, and restoration, adaptive reuse, or relocation of the building is untenable due to the advanced deterioration of the structure due to long-term neglect and abandonment. The heritage impact assessment went on to recommend that the loss of this contributing resource can be mitigated by the design of a new building at the property. Those further guidelines and policies in the Blackfriars Petersville Heritage Conservation District Plan were used to evaluate that proposal. A proposed new building, which is the subject of the Heritage Alteration Permit application, has been proposed. It's a two-story building with a three-bay facade design, and it's proposed to be clad in brick. It has simulated divided lights with a shallow pitched roof, characteristics that we find in the Blackfriars Petersville Heritage Conservation District. As you'll note, it's very different from the existing contributing resource. We don't always seek to replicate existing contributing resources, but find change within our heritage conservation districts that's respectful of its cultural heritage value. And that's achieved here through the attention to form, detail, proportions, and massing in the proposed design. This is a rendering showing the proposed new building within the streetscape of Blackfriars Street. And as part of this consideration, there's consultation. The Stewardship Subcommittee was consulted, and the LADGE was consulted at its last meeting on December 11th. If you'll just draw your attention to the agenda package, page 9 and 10, you will find the LADGE's comments where they did articulate concerns about the regrettable, and I'm quoting here, regrettable example of demolition by neglect. And the LADGE implores stronger enforcement of the property standards bylaw to avoid future demolition by neglect of London's cultural heritage resources. In addition to consultation with the LADGE, notice was sent out to property owners within 120 meters. I did receive a phone call and an inquiry on behalf of the Blackfriars Petersville Neighborhood Association, and this, of course, was advertised in the Londoner. Our colleagues at UTRCA also reminded us that a Section 28 permit is required. In conclusion, in all of our heritage conservation districts, retention and conservation, whether that be adaptive reuse or renovation that's sympathetic to the heritage character, is always preferred over demolition. A detailed historical research has been undertaken for this property, and it did not identify any significant historical or associative values that are unique to this property. It's very much part of the Blackfriars Petersville Heritage Conservation District. However, a review of its property ownership and occupancy didn't identify any significant associations. The Heritage Impact Assessment supported the property owner's application, and staff concur with the findings that the loss of this contributing resource in this instance can be mitigated through an appropriate new building that is part of the heritage character of the Blackfriars Petersville. And the evaluation of the proposed new building found that it met the guidelines for new buildings in the HCD plan. So in conclusion, our staff recommendation is recommending that the demolition be supported with terms and conditions for the new building to ensure that it is part of the cultural heritage value of Blackfriars Petersville going forward into the future. So just wrapping up the existing building and the proposed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ganyu. So would the applicant wish to make any comment or speak? No? Okay. So I will go to committee for technical questions. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Really quickly through you to Mr. Gagnon. Thank you. The report was excellent. I learned a lot reading through it. Both the staff report and the consultant's report, I think were great examples here. My questions, in this circumstance, having read through this, it seems a lot of the support for the recommendation for the demolition permit is based on the fact that there will be a building that's consistent with the neighborhood character that's being proposed. In absence of that proposal, would the demolition permit be recommended?
Through the chair, I think it's always staff's preference to not see vacant lots within our heritage conservation districts, as what we really are trying to protect is what makes those places unique, and that can be its buildings, but it's also the relationship of buildings and streetscapes and how all of those pieces fit together. And when you are missing an eye tooth, it really does leave a blank slate that needs to be filled. So it's our preference in this instance especially, but in situations where we're trying to consider a demolition, that mitigation by a sympathetic and appropriately designed new building can achieve some mitigation of those losses that we're seeing with the destruction of a contributing resource.
Thank you. And through you, Madam Chair, a quick follow-up. In other questions where we've taken a look about demolition versus construction and that gap in period of time or perhaps that somebody doesn't come forward with something. They may have proposed it, but it doesn't actually get built. And so the demolition occurs, and then there's just a perpetual. Do we have any safeguards in place to ensure that this would move forward? I think one of the things that we floated before was that the demolition permit would be contingent upon pulling a building permit, for example. Are those opportunities that are available for us in this circumstance?
Through the chair, my colleagues in Building Division might be able to respond more specifically, but it's my understanding that there aren't those assurances that when a building is lost, that the city can compel the construction of a new building. We do rely on the promise of the property owner to execute that. And just to draw a similarity, in the Old East Heritage Conservation District, we did see some demolitions about 2 years ago, and both of those buildings are under construction on English Street near the future Lorne Avenue Park. So we're very hopeful to see that this will be executed. It does often take time in between the demolition and before a building permit is constructed. I would love to see some more reassurances, but maybe my colleagues in building can respond more specifically.
Through the chair, under the Building Code Act, the Heritage Act is applicable law, but it's really with respect to the demolition of the building. It's not with respect to the construction of the new. I do recall, though, in some circumstances, we did use language for designated buildings where we had conditions of demolition, where we tied the demolition. We didn't issue the demolition permit until such time as they applied. I think it was they applied for a building permit. So you could put in we'd have to be very careful how the language is read. I was actually trying to find it while you were talking. And so maybe I could find that clause. If you're interested in inserting that clause, we could put that in and have that ready for you for council.
Thank you both, through you, Madam Chair. I think that was something we looked at the downtown HCA, and so if there's language that could mimic that, that would be helpful. And I think it might be appropriate in this circumstance, given the context of where the report led us on. So, thank you.
Councillor Kaibaga?
Thank you, through Madam Chair. I also wanted to comment on the report, how great and informational it was really, really well put out, and it gave a lot of information. I did have one question that I was asking myself the whole time I was reading it. Is the current applicant for this proposal is the same person who owned the property that was neglected?
Through the chair, it's my understanding the current property owner purchased the property in 2018 in the summer, I believe, at which time the discussions leading us towards this meeting tonight started to occur. There was some property standards issues, as you can understand, and also the time it takes to prepare a detailed heritage impact assessment that you saw appended to the staff report do take time to prepare.
Any other technical? Oh, Councillor Kaibaga.
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. I think for me that was really important to know, because this has been a huge conversation in the ward and in the neighborhood as well. And so I appreciate that, you know, they're proposing to put this type of building and using, you know, the heritage aspect to it as well, as the building had been neglected. But I'm just curious to know, just kind of following up on what the comments that Latch made, I 100% agree that this is very regrettable that we have to get to this place. And this kind of goes back to where my motion was in the last time, to make sure that we are following up and we're doing something about these heritage, you know, buildings and the houses that are in heritage districts, to make sure that they're up to standards and we don't have to do demolition by neglect. Thankfully, this is something that's going to replace. But my other question around this is, how are we making sure that we're not going to wake up with a whole neighborhood full of just buildings that are replacing the heritage buildings or houses that are not being conserved, if I can say. I worry that we're gonna get a lot of these type of applications, although I support it, and I think it's a great, it's good that we are putting something there, we're not just leaving the lot empty, but how are we gonna make sure that this is something that's not gonna keep happening, you know, falling back on what Latch's comments were, what are we doing? I know we said we're gonna bring a report back, and I think that was through Mr. Katolik's department, to the actions that we're going to take. As great as this is, I want to see more action taken to make sure that we are preserving and protecting our heritage, and we don't have to keep resorting to stuff like this. Otherwise, we're just telling everybody this is what we're going to start doing, and everybody's going to start applying. I mean, it's business, and it. I don't know. I want to hear more on what are the measures that we're willing to take to make sure that we are protecting these districts and the heritage districts and buildings and houses in our city. It's really important to a lot of people in our community, and myself included. So I wanted to hear that piece in that. This sounds like a good solution, but this could also turn into a bad solution if everybody decides to do the same thing. So through your chair.
Okay, so I'll let Mr. Gagnon answer that. It's not technically, in my opinion, a technical question pertinent to this particular application. It's to the broader issue, but I thought maybe it could come up after the PPM, but I'll let Mr. Gagnon answer that. Or whoever, Mr. Barrett.
Through the chair, as councillors noted, there has been a request that we look at this issue as it relates to property standards in heritage districts and heritage properties, and that report is going to be coming forward. So we are working on that. As it relates to this instance, an application can be made. It's going to go through this process, and so any application for a heritage alteration permit has a process that goes through. Council gets to see and consider each of those applications on their merits. The issue of how we deal with the preservation of these structures from a property standards perspective is a larger issue, which is being looked at, and another report will be coming forward on that.
Thank you. Any other technical questions? I'll go to the public now. Is there any member of the public who would like to speak? Would you like to speak to this? No, you're just here to hear it. Anybody who wishes to make a comment or ask a question in the gallery? I'm not seeing any. So I will look for a motion to close the public, moved by the mayor, seconded by Councillor Kayabaga to close the public participation meeting.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Any other comments or debate, discussion from committee? Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I did have one other question. Noticing that that each of the 5 bedrooms has an ensuite bathroom, at what point technically does that become a duplex, triplex, multiplex? Is it a question of number of discrete entrances? I imagine so.
Again, through the chair, and I'm sure Mr. Kotzfus can jump in, but each of these structure types are defined in the zoning bylaw, so this is still defined as a single detached dwelling unit, which would permit the 5 bedrooms. Within the Blackfriars Petersville area, just so you know, there is an amendment to the zoning that went through a number of years ago that restricts conversions. So right now, it is a 2-family zone in most of Blackfriars Petersville, but it would only recognize existing 2 families. So if a duplex had existed on this property, a duplex would be permitted through reconstruction, but if a duplex did not exist, then you don't get it, you only get the single detached, and that's what this application is for.
Thank you. Yeah, I noticed this was somewhat unique, having ensuite bathrooms for every bedroom, which starts to push the envelope a little bit towards multiple units versus 5 separate, 5 bedrooms within a single family home. Recognizing it is what that is, I appreciate that. I think the second part, interesting file because we've got a heritage component and a building development component to it. The other part was the Upper Thames aspect of this, and any finishing of a basement. I'd imagine, given what we put some terms in place which as Mr. Barrett alluded to, restricted the ability to do further conversions. But I'd also think that basement units or living space was not allowed through UTRCA. Is that correct? And I didn't see anything on the lower elevations showing a below-grade elevation on this.
Through the chair, so with any application, right now you're just dealing with the designation aspect, so you're not dealing with the actual permit application or the construction. This file will still have to go through a proper permit review process, and as part of that, there's a couple of drop-dead, I call them, issues. One is conservation authority, the other one is zoning. So we would have to ensure that we're comfortable from a municipality that the bedrooms and the bathrooms issue is adequately addressed within our zoning bylaw. If not, that it could change. And then the second aspect is conservation authority is always circulated with our Upper Thames within their regulated area because they would need to approve it. So we would get some commentary back with respect to whether or not they could finish this basement.
Thank you, I appreciate that. I don't mean to get it all conflated. Recognizing though what we do have is the heritage alteration permit, which mandates the built form itself of what would, especially the exterior aesthetic. So, okay, that's all very helpful. To echo Councillor Kayabaga's concerns, that demolition by neglect piece, I think it's something that we need to continue to consider, and I'm looking forward to hearing the report about methods that can be taken to help alleviate those concerns. I certainly would look to the heritage community to help provide some input on other models that other municipalities have used in addressing heritage demolition by neglect. I think those are really important for us to have an understanding of legislatively where we can go in helping to reduce this. I did recognize in the report the applicant purchased the property in 2018 is not a contributor to that neglect, and I think that was an important question to raise because I would be really reticent to I guess kind of reward a property owner who had allowed something to persist into decay. The photo evidence was quite helpful. There really is nothing on the interior of that house, and it looks quite risky to maintain. Normally, I look for every opportunity we can to preserve something. I would agree with the assessment in this circumstance that there really is no reasonable prospect to do so, and I appreciate the proposal being brought forward. I think it's complementary and sensitive to the district as well. So I would move support for the motion.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, staff, for the report. I found it very informative. And I tell you, I think we're going to be seeing a lot more of these kind of requests coming forward, and it becomes a challenge as a committee member how we deal with these. And definitely we need to maybe have a better way of doing these demolition requests. I do have a question through you, Madam Chair, to staff. If we did not approve this demolition, what would happen?
Who wants
All
to
right,
take it?
I'll take another one.
Okay, Mr. Kotsovas.
Well, there's an outstanding order, property standards order, if I understand it correctly, that's still, it's been extended by committee to May 25th, 2020. So I imagine they were anticipating this request, and should it not go forward, then they would have to address the non-conformance issues that are currently in the order, which are fairly significant.
Are you finished, Councillor Hopkins?
No, I'm not.
Go ahead.
Thank you for that information, and that becomes the dilemma because there's already an order of, out there, and I want to acknowledge the applicant coming forward with a proposal. I think, you know, as we look at a demolition, it's nice to know what's going to be replacing it. So I thank you for that and for respecting the heritage in the area as well. But It is a concern, and it's a challenge, how we try to protect our heritage buildings. I think we definitely need to do be smarter about it, and I know this is not going to be the end of requests coming forward, so I do think maybe it's a provincial matter to some extent. You know, we're kind of constrained and how we move forward would be nice to get some support from the provincial government when it comes to protecting our heritage. So I'm just making those comments. I will be supporting this demolition, but I'm not happy about doing that. It's very difficult because I know what's going to be coming forward are going to be more requests and challenges to especially through demolition of neglect. And I would like to see us do a better way with dealing with our heritage and preserving it, because right now, I don't think we have very many options. And it's almost, you know, we don't have a choice. But again, I'd be interested in knowing what the comments to adding a clause to allow for this building to be built. I'm not sure if that's going to be part of the motion, but I want to thank Councillor Turner for bringing that up, because I think that's something that we can at least have before us, knowing that if we're going to take this building down, we know what we're going to get, and it won't be sitting, not being built or anything like that. So again, just curious to know what the clause looks like. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Thank you. My question is about the Conservation Authority regulated area, and more specifically where this is, whether it's in the floodway or whether it's in the flood fringe. I know we're not dealing with the actual building, so I hesitate to really talk about it too much, but you know, I think the decision around the designation seems to be hinging a little bit on the fact that it could be replaced depending on where it is. I mean, it's mentioned in the report that the building was damaged during floods, big floods, right, that flooded this whole area. And I think Councillor Turner was right to be asking about that and what kind of restrictions there are. And I generally don't necessarily need to know the answer, because I think I'm comfortable with a demolition of the building separate from what's going to happen with a replacement building. But it's not totally clear to me that just anything could go here, or that even the building that's being proposed could go there. I'm not sure. So I'm not sure we know the answer, but I think also I'll just flag this for future reports. When we're dealing with a heritage demolition or an alteration permit, and it is in one of these areas, I think we need to have some kind of commentary on it, just to get a sense of, like, is this even possible or not? Because, you know, in certain parts of the flood, like in the floodway, for example, it's like, you're not building anything except roads, key municipal infrastructure. Like, there's very specific policy about that stuff. So I just want to make sure that gets addressed in future reports to the extent that we can.
Through the chair, this area is in an area that was known as the West London Special Policy Area. However, when the city prepared the special policy, the province decided it wasn't going to approve anymore. But since that time, which is now almost 20 years, the city and the Upper Thames have used the same policies that would exist as it were an approved special policy area. That means that intensification is permitted to the degree that exists already, but then there would be, as Mr. Kotzvis noted, additional requirements, perhaps related to building elevations or entrance elevations related to the flood matters that would be part of the Section 28 approval. But in general, redevelopment to the level of intensification that currently exists is what would be permitted in general by the Upper Thames. So if there was a residential unit there, they would allow a residential unit. But as I noted earlier, we amended the zoning so that if you are an R2 and existing as an R2, you do get to go back with a 2-family unit. But if you're zoned R2, but just developed as a single unit, you only get a single unit in the case of redevelopment, because of the need to not intensify beyond what exists.
Wonderful. Okay. Are you finished, Deputy Mayor? Yep. Mayor Holder.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief on this listen, I've heard the concerns expressed by colleagues with respect to any properties heritage designated and heritage related. But really clear from the report as I read it is this owner did not cause that problem. This owner inherited the condition of 88 Blackfriars as it was. And I think sometimes when you see a situation when it's in that kind of disrepair and frankly can't be fixed, I think sometimes it's appropriate to offer a plaudit and a compliment to a new owner who makes the financial investment in this too. And when I look at the design that has been presented, obviously a lot of thought and care has gone into this as well. So I agree with colleagues about sharing those concerns regarding heritage. At the same time, I think when someone sees an issue like that and says, I think I can do better and make it better, I think that person deserves a very positive stroke. And thank you, staff, for working with them and presenting this report.
Anybody else? Councillor Van Hulst.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and through you to our staff. Once the building is erected, and I think this is a great plan. I'm pleased with how this went forward. I just want to ask about the secondary suites as a right. Is there a possibility to add a secondary suite to this property?
Through the chair again, the secondary dwelling unit policies were actually also done in contemplation of redevelopment within these floodplain type areas, and they do not permit the intensification within these areas.
Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry, just one more quick, back to the question that I'd asked earlier about that demolition permit, building permit linkage. Is there a way that, it looks like Mr. Kostifis is ahead of me, so I was just looking what I needed to put into my motion to be able to tie those.
Through the chair. So in the past, what we did, the last one I think we applied it to was 123 Queens. You might recall that discussion. But with 123 Queens, it was we required them to obtain site plan approval and apply for a full building permit prior to. So the catch was they had to get site plan approval. In this case, in absence of site plan approval, the best you can do is require them to submit for building permits. So, but that's it. So they would just make a building permit application. There's no guarantees, however, that they're going to take out the permit or do anything. It's just that they would submit for building permit. And the reason being is because they'd be in a catch-22. You can't issue the building permit without a demolition clearance. So you can't require them to get the permit. It wouldn't make any sense. So that's the best I think we can do in this circumstance.
Thank you, I appreciate that. I think the other one was the Dundas Street property between Richmond and Clarence, or Richmond and Talbot. Was the one that we were looking at specifically in there, just so we didn't have that gap in the streetscape. So perhaps there might be just a clause B in the motion that would say something to the effect of request staff to provide options for I guess restricting or limiting the time between demolition and building or something like that. Perhaps Mr. Kostifis has a recommendation that might be able to give you the direction by the time we get to council or something.
I just sent the one that I spoke to the clerk, but in terms of a timeline, I'm not sure if the demolition permit could lapse in a time. I'll defer to my colleague. If you actually impose a timeline within X number of months or things like that, I'm not sure how that. We've never done that before, so. Was that what you were proposing, Councillor?
Yeah, perhaps through you, Madam Chair. Just whatever the wording we used on Dundas Street, just to apply to this. So perhaps that staff provide by council information, wording consistent with the application on Dundas Street for consistency.
So while we're working on that, I actually just want to echo some of the comments that the mayor made. You know, we have an applicant who's come forward who purchased a property that was already in advanced state of disrepair. And I think what's being proposed, although we can't compel any developer who applies for an application to develop and then decides to wait a long time before they develop, we can't really compel any builder to build, even though they've been granted permission to do so. But, you know, I like what is being proposed here. I think it's far superior to what exists. I think the point of the Heritage Conservation District is to maintain the character of the district. It doesn't mean every single building that exists there needs to continue to exist. And in this case, where it's a building that is in advanced state of disrepair, I think putting something sympathetic and that matches the context of the surrounding district is a great alternative to go with. And but I do agree as well that we have to, in as many instances as possible, prevent this kind of neglect. Basically, it's neglect of our property standards, and it's not just in heritage conservation districts. There are quite a few vacant buildings in Ward 5, which is not does not have a heritage conservation district, where you know, I'm seeing some neglect taking place, and it's quite alarming to the residents in the surrounding neighborhood. So I think it's important that we enforce our property standards bylaw to the greatest extent possible to prevent this sort of thing from happening. But I don't want to lump this applicant in with any of that stuff that's been going on. The applicant purchased a property, the property is in the state that it's in, and he's doing, apparently, it seems that he's doing everything he can to respect the Heritage Conservation District. And I applaud that, and I am very hopeful that we see a new building there as quickly as possible. The clerk, hopefully I've talked long enough that the clerk is finished with the wording. And we have Councillor Turner moving that, and the mayor is seconding that. We might be ready to vote. Are we ready to vote? Committee is reading the motion. So the new item is F, I believe. Just for clarification, before we go to vote, I just wanted to ask staff, so Councillor Hopkins had asked a question earlier about, or made a comment about not approving the demolition. And I obviously committee is not going there, but just for clarification, if we were not to approve this demolition, is our only alternative then to designate this property as a heritage property?
Through the chair, the property is already designated by virtue it's in the Heritage Conservation District. That bylaw is registered on the title of the property, so any new purchaser or future purchaser would be aware of its heritage status.
So in the situation where it's a listed property and not in a district, is that our choice in that situation?
Through the chair, that's correct. The next PPM that you'll be hearing is a demolition request for a heritage listed property. In that situation, the only options available to municipal council are to allow the demolition to proceed or to designate the property under the Ontario Heritage Act. For a heritage designated property like this, or a property if it were individually designated, municipal council can approve with terms and conditions, or refuse the heritage alteration permit application.
Thank you. With that, I think we are ready to vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Moving along to item 3.2 is another public participation meeting. This one, this time a heritage listed property at 2325 Sunningdale Road East. I'll look for a motion to open the PPM. Moved by Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Councillor Kabaga. And we can vote on that. Mr. Mayor? The mayor has indicated that he is voting yes manually.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
So before we begin, I'll just look to the gallery to see if there is anybody here to hear about this item, the demolition request for a heritage listed property at 2325 Sunningdale Road East by Lafarge Canada, Inc. Are there any members of the public here to listen to this item? You can just indicate with a wave of your hand. I'm not seeing anybody here for this item. So first I'll go to committee. Does committee wish a full presentation on this, or we could get a brief introduction from staff, or a full presentation? It's up to the committee. I'm not seeing any interest in a full presentation since we've all read our report. If you could just you can give a 1 or 2 minute overview of the application and then we can go ahead.
Thank you very much. This is just briefly a demolition request for the heritage listed property at 2325 Sunningdale Road East. So it's a 99-acre property that's currently being used, licensed by Lafarge Canada for pit operations known as the Talbot Pit. They've submitted a demolition application, as you've read in the report. A heritage impact assessment was submitted as well by the property owner, which included an evaluation of the property under Ontario Regulation 906. The results of that evaluation determined that the property did not meet the criteria for physical or design value, historical or associative value, as well as contextual value. Staff reviewed that report and agreed with the outcomes, and so we are recommending that the property be removed from the register, as well as the demolition being consented.
Thank you. And Mr. Barrett, I believe, would like to say something quickly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to introduce Michael Grego, who's a new heritage planner. Michael's been with us since, I believe, September. And this is his first presentation in front of committee. So he was able to get up, give the presentation before being introduced, but he's now introduced himself to this presentation.
He's following the chair's lead of trying to move things along. Welcome, Mr. Grego. Great first job here at the Planning and Environment Committee. I'll look to members of the public. Oh, first, I wonder if the applicant is here. I don't see the applicant here, so I'm assuming the applicant agrees with the staff recommendation. Any members of the public wish to comment on this item or ask any questions? I'm not seeing any members of the public looking to make a comment. With that, I'll go to committee to close the public participation meeting, moved by Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Councillor Kayabaga, and we'll vote on that.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Any questions or comments from committee on this item? Councillor Turner.
I noticed an interesting synergy between 3.1 and 3.2. 3.1 identified that they would attempt to rebuild with buff brick should they be able to find reclaimed buff brick, and item 3.2 identifies that they would submit these bricks for reclamation if anybody was looking for them. So perhaps we can put these two applicants together so that they can speak with each other. Might have an opportunity there. I think it's a reasonable application. And again, the same circumstance. it was lived in until 2018. I don't see this as one of those contributing pieces to the heritage inventory, unlike the previous one, which was a contributing asset. So I'm happy to support the recommendation here.
So that's moved by the staff recommendation is being moved by Councillor Turner and seconded by the mayor. Any other comments? I'm seeing that. So we can vote on that.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Next is item 3.3, another public participation meeting regarding 1830 Warncliffe Road South. And I'll look for a motion by Councillor Turner, seconded by Deputy Mayor Helmer. We can vote on that to open the PPM.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Okay, before we move along with that, I'll look to the gallery to see if anybody is here for this item. Mr. Kirkness? For the applicant. Yep. Anybody else? Any members of the public here to hear about 1830 Warncliffe Road South? I'm not seeing any. So committee, are you interested? Councillor Turner?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm interested mostly specifically vis-a-vis the commercial cap and a bit more explanation. So if perhaps the presentation could focus on that, then that would be helpful.
Wonderful. So we'll go to Mr. Maxula for a brief presentation with specific focus on the cap there, if you don't mind. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The property is located at 1830 Warncliffe Road South. It's east, kind of a triangle piece of land south of Warncliffe, east of Wonderland and north of Exeter Road. Getting to the cap, the cap for this land is 30% can be used for the commercial cap in this situation. This property currently has 24.5% that's proposed for the use. There's additional proposed buildings at the rear of the building off of Exeter Road. Actually, the site plan, or did I go past it? Oops. So at the back of the property, off Exeter Road, they're proposing 2 buildings and the addition to the front of the building off of Warncliffe Road. Right now, it's just proposal. There's nothing concrete at the time. It's just to see, trying to provide more uses through the ASA zone to allow for more commercial uses similar to other uses in the area. The RSC, the restricted service commercial, actually restricts what they can do on the lands and prohibits them from expanding at this time. So with the commercial cap on here, they're still under the cap at 24%, where 30 is the max. So they could be allowed to have up 1,700 square meters of commercial cap, another 30%, and they're proposing 1,400 this time. So it's keeping within the cap of the area. Thank you.
Thank you. Any technical questions from committee? The applicant, would you like to speak to this?
Yes, I would, Madam Chair. Only to say that the owner is a gentleman by the name of Eamon Shauna, who is not in the country at this point. He's coming back from vacation, Christmas vacation. He wanted to be here. He wanted to also have me thank the planning committee or the planning staff for putting this positive report. It basically responds 100% to what we applied for. We were really just trying to catch the zoning up to other properties to the north and to the northeast, to this ASA zone as opposed to the more restricted service commercial zone. So really it's catch up on the zoning. I suppose if the city's new zoning bylaw was in hand, we'd be getting something very similar anyway, but that's quite a few months off, I expect. So we would hope that the planning committee would accept the planning staff supportive recommendation to our application, and I would be glad to try and answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kirkness. Any members of the public wish to speak to this item? I know I already asked, but I'm just double checking. And I'm not seeing any person interested in speaking or commenting or asking questions. So I will go to committee to close the PPM. Moved by Councillor Kayabaga, seconded by Councillor Hopkins.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Any discussion, committee? No. Do I have a mover? Councillor Hopkins?
Madam Chair, if I can just make a couple questions, and I guess I could also follow up with a comment. I always find the conversation around the enterprise corridor interesting because I do believe as we try to keep within the cap, we have made changes along this corridor, and trying to understand it as a councillor of the ward is always a challenge. And I also think that it's really hard to understand how we're following through with what SWAP is calling for in our permitted uses. And one of the things that really caught my attention when I was reading this report was that it's got to complement the traditional uses and forms within the village, Lambeth Village core. So my question is just that. If you can sort of show me or help me understand so I can pass that information on to the community if I'm asked how this does fit in with the Lambeth Village core area. One of the concerns with this application, we sent 11 requests out to the community and probably didn't receive a response. I can't remember now, but there's not a lot of information out there in the community that we're doing all this. And I think, you know, here we are at a PPM. It's not surprising that we don't have people here commenting because the community doesn't really understand what's going on. So if you can give me some kind of feedback as to how this is going to complement the traditional uses in the Lambeth area.
Madam Chair, when the SWAP policies were being written and thought about, it was the intent was that the Wonderland corridor would have retail uses and restaurant uses and those types of uses that would be a better complement to those in Lambeth, whereas the uses permitted right now are more automotive based, automotive repair, automotive sales, and those were thought to be less compatible with those in Lambeth. So it's not necessarily that the ASA uses, each individual uses on an individual basis are more compatible with Lambeth. It's just that the grouping of retail and restaurants and services and entertainment are more compatible than the automotive uses that are currently permitted.
Thank you. I also understand with this application that we still don't know what's going to be proposed on this property as well. So, you know, as we approve these applications, and I appreciate the comments, but it really, I think, leads to not really understanding what's going to develop in this area, and that becomes a concern for me. I think that, you know, how close do we stay with the recommendations in SWAP? It's always a challenge. How, you know, the enterprise corridor has been a challenge to us, and it's how true do we want to be to the plan as we go around or along and make these changes to the plan. It's that challenge and that balance. So I think it is important that we try to stay true as much as possible. Obviously, creating some flexibility. I think when it comes to commercial use, the market should, to some extent, probably dictate, but just trying to understand what we're doing here and sticking to the plan is becoming harder and harder for me to understand. Also, the importance of how we move around this area. It's a huge challenge. Our road infrastructure, and as we approve all these developments, which are going to happen, where we seem to be a little bit behind in being able to move around. How do we make this area walkable? How do we improve transit? those are the challenges that I hear from the community about the need to be able to move and as well as develop. Balancing growth is not easy, but I hope that we will be able to stay true to SWAB, consider what's going on in the Lambeth area, and generally supportive of how we move forward with this recommendation.
Anybody else? No? Okay. The staff recommendation, did you move that, Councillor Hopkins, or did I just assume you did? Okay, she's moved it. Seconded by the mayor. We can vote on that.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Our next public participation meeting is item 3.4, 1297 Warncliffe Road South. I need a mover to open the public participation meeting, moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Kayabaga, and we can vote on that.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Before we begin, I'll look to the gallery to see if any member of the public is here for this item. Is there anyone in the gallery here for somebody up there? Yes, perfect. Are you the applicant? You're the applicant. Anybody else to hear 1297 Warncliffe Road South? I'm not seeing any. So I'm looking to committee. Do we want a full staff report or presentation on this item? I'm not seeing that. So, Ms. Lowry, if you could just do a brief 1 or 2 minute introduction, that would be great.
Absolutely. Thank you, Madam Chair. So the subject site is located at 1297 Warncliffe Road South, which, as you can see on this map, is located on the west side of Warncliffe at the intersection of Bradley Avenue West. The applicant has requested to rezone the subject site to a restricted service commercial special provision zone to facilitate the development of a 2-story automobile sales and service establishment. The requested special provisions would permit reduced front and exterior side yard depths of 5.5 meters and 2 meters respectively, as well as a 1.2 meter setback from the daylight triangle at the intersection of Warncliffe and Bradley. The applicant is also seeking to remove a number of existing holding provisions that currently apply to the site through the requested amendment. In addition to the requested special provisions, staff also recommends 2 additional special provisions, which would prohibit parking with the exception of 2 barrier-free parking spaces between the building facade and the street, as well as to require a 6-meter setback between any parking area and Bradley Avenue West. We received very little feedback from the public on this application, and staff recommends that the recommended amendment be approved. Thank you.
Thank you. Any technical questions from committee? Mr. Councillor Turner.
You'll get it eventually. Thank you, Madam Chair. My question was just around the vehicle loading and unloading areas. And the second question was with respect to having a new auto corridor. This was a holding office area before, recognizing further to the northeast, there's a number of auto retailers. Have we designated auto retail strips? There's one, well, there's a few of them in the city. This one seems to be the most recent one. And I don't know if we contemplate the length or the extent to which those expand or pose any limits on those.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I just wanted to get a history of the office zoning. It was almost a fleeting zone. It was zoned office under the area plan, and then through the 5-year review prior to swap, it was then rezoned to restricted, or it was redesignated, I'm sorry, to restricted service commercial. But that zone still applied, although the designation had changed, so we had a non-conforming issue. So in fact, the change of zoning now is more consistent with the longer-term vision for this corridor. There was no intention to create a golden auto mile on this, specifically for that, with the exception that the designation would permit that. And there's some agglomeration of economies, that's my economics degree kicking in, where some of these competitors who locate near each other actually have benefits. And that's why we have food courts as well, with everyone gathering in one area. And I think that's just what's being sustained here through the market is this agglomeration of auto dealers, but not intended to be just solely an auto dealer, golden auto mile.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess I was wondering if there were limits. I imagine at some point you'd want to say that's kind of the end in terms of the perimeter of what that auto commercial would be. We've got the further south or further north on Wharncliffe. Now for East London, down Dundas East, there's one as well. This almost bounds if you were to continue over to Holly Gully at Wharncliffe and Wonderland. So the potential there is to continue doing that type of use, recognizing there's only so many brands of cars. But okay, the second question was with respect to car carrying trucks. I know through experience I've recognized that there's fairly significant traffic impacts and visibility impacts associated with those commercial haulers unloading on the street itself. Will there be any contemplation of where the loading and unloading of vehicles will happen? Will it happen on the street, or does it end up going around onto Bradley and then taking up a fair amount of street? Will we have traffic conditions in place to restrict where that operation can occur?
Through you, Madam Chair. The site is large enough to accommodate that kind of activity on site. That said, that's more of a site planning matter than the rezoning stage. However, perhaps the applicant has plans in mind for how that will function on site and could speak to that a little better than I could.
So actually, that's a good segue. I'll go to the applicant. Do you wish to comment on this application? Do you have an answer to the councillor regarding the loading and offloading of vehicles?
At this time, that hasn't been determined, but the intent would be to do it on site, not on Bradley or Wharncliffe.
Thank you. Any other technical questions? No? Any members of the public looking to speak, provide comment, ask questions about this application? I'm not seeing any, so I need a motion to close the public participation meeting. Moved by Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Councillor Kayabaga. Thank you, Ms. Lowry.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Any discussion, committee? Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that would just be my recommendation for the site plan phase, that be considered. I don't know the answer to it, but I think it's something that needs to be addressed. I remember on one we used to, our ambulance station was right next to a car retailer, and that truck would park on the street, and as the ambulance would pull out, we had no visibility onto Oxford and would almost get smoked every time. So so it's really important that, and it looks like the site is sufficiently large that it can maintain the operation on site. But I think it's a worthwhile consideration through the site plan phase.
Mr. Kostas?
Through the chair, so that would be a reasonable recommendation. We, at site plan, we do apply turning templates on the site to see if they can accommodate turn moves within the site itself. So that's where we encourage the drop-offs to be, and should they be doing it on the road, then it becomes our enforcement matter. So we deal with it through that means.
Thank you. Do I have a motion? Moved the staff recommendation by Councillor Turner and seconded by Deputy Mayor Helmer. If there is no other discussion, we can vote on that.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
The next public participation meeting is item 3.5. The LIUNA 1059 Training Fund Management Application for 635 Wilton Grove Road. I need a motion to open the PPM, moved by the Mayor, seconded by Councillor Turner.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
And before we begin, I'll look to the gallery to see if there is any member of the public here about this application. The application for the LIUNA 1059 Training Fund Management, Inc. At 635 Wilton Grove Road. Yes, there's a member of the public here. There are a couple. So I will go to Ms. Vivian for the staff presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this is a zoning bylaw amendment application pertaining to the property located at 635 Wilton Grove Road. So the site is located at the corner of the intersection of Wilton Grove Road and Roxborough Road. It's regular in shape and just under 7 acres in area and currently contains an existing industrial building. So the site is surrounded by light industrial uses to the north, a vacant parcel and light industrial uses to the east, commercial plaza to the south, and commercial uses further to the west as well. So the requested amendment is to rezone the site to permit a limited range of uses within the existing building. So the amendment would permit a broader range of non-industrial uses that are identified as secondary permitted uses. Special provisions are also being requested to add a business office and meeting rooms accessory to that business office use as additional permitted uses. So it's currently a light industrial zone on the property, so looking to go to another light industrial zone with special provisions attached to it. So the site is located within the light industrial designation of the 1989 official plan, as well as the light industrial place type of the London plan, and it's currently zoned light industrial 1. So it's also located within the Broccoli industrial neighborhood of the Southwest Area Secondary Plan, and the policies within the 89 official plan, the London plan, and the Southwest Area Secondary Plan support the requested amendment. So for the permitted uses, the proposed uses as of right include a medical dental office and support office, among others, within that light industrial LI4 zone. So the proposed added uses will allow for the rehabilitation of the existing building to be fully utilized with compatible and complementary uses to the surrounding area. So the requested amendment is in conformity with the London plan and the 1989 official plan. As such, staff is recommending the requested amendment to rezone the subject lands from a light industrial LI1 zone to a light industrial LI4 special provision zone. The recommended amendment is consistent with the provincial policy statement and the general intent of the 1989 official plan and the London plan, and it will also allow for the applicant to operate out of an existing industrial building in a desired location and effectively providing services to more trades of the City of London. This added uses allow for a broader range of uses on the lands that are considered compatible with surrounding land uses. Thank you.
Excellent, thanks very much. Any technical questions? No, is the applicant here? Would you like to speak to this application, or are you fine with the staff recommendation? Great, thank you. Any member of the public have questions, would like to provide comment? I'm not seeing any. So we can close the public participation meeting. I need a motion moved by Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Councillor Kayabaga.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Any discussion? Mr. Mayor.
Thanks very much, Chair. Now, I've looked at this particular file, and what strikes me is the echo. What strikes me is the good adoptive reuse of this particular facility. And what I appreciate, it notwithstanding its intention to serve its members, through a dental clinic and a medical and an eyeglass clinic. But the employment opportunities it creates, we've had a lot of focus around jobs and the issue of trades and the need for that within this community. And I think that what Luna 1059, by making the investment in this property, has done is they put focus where it belongs, and they've truly put their money where it matters. And I think the impact on trades will be significant service to their members. So I'm happy to move this.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Are you looking to move the staff recommendation? Yes. Any other comments? Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, Madam Chair, a quick question to staff regarding the, I guess the approval from UTRCA, given that this is on the floodplain map. Do we need approval from Upper Thames, or is that a concern?
Through you, Madam Chair, so on page 362 of your report is the comments from Upper Thames Conservation Authority. No actual development is occurring here. It's the reuse of an existing building. They don't have any concerns. They have flagged that Section 28 permit would be required if there is any addition to the building, but it is being monitored through that as well.
I have a mover. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Hopkins. Any other discussion? We can vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
The next public participation meeting is item 3.6. Lots 50, 51, and 61, and lots 62 through 89 inclusive, registered plan 33M-768. I need a motion to open the public participation meeting, moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Kayabaga. We can vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
And before we begin, are there any members of the public here for this item? Yes, are you the applicant? You're the applicant. Any other members of the public here? So I look to committee. Do we need a full presentation on this item? I see a lot of shaking heads. So Mr. Mottram, if you could just give 1 or 2 minute brief synopsis of this thing.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The application is by Colin McClure on behalf of Norquay Developments, and it's a request for some zoning amendments for specific lots within the Eagle Ridge subdivision, Phase 2. The subdivision includes the extension of Keynes Road through to Oxford Street West, as well as Linkway Boulevard west of West Elborn. And within this phase, there are a total of 89 single detached lots. Some of the lots, the applicant has requested a special zone amendment, special provisions for the lot coverage and anterior side yard setbacks. It's important to note that the subdivision plan is registered now, that the servicing for the subdivision is completed, and that construction of homes is underway. The request is to accompany the proposal for 1-story single detached dwellings with the increased lot coverage and decreased side yard setbacks on lots 50 to 51, lot 61, and lot 62 to 89. Lots 50 and 51 and 61, I would note that those lots are smaller lots, but are adjacent to an open space block, as well as adjacent to the Thames Valley Trail system, multi-use trail. And that the lots in 62 to 89 are larger lots within the R18 zone and are similar in size to the existing lots within Phase 1. And the table and it does a comparison of the regulations, but I would like to note that under the R14 zone, lot coverage maximum currently, the standard is 40%. The request is to increase by 5% to 45%. As well as in the R18 zone for the lots in the northerly part of the subdivision, lot 62 to 89, that would increase from 35% to 45%. So staff are recommending approval of the requested special provisions for the following reasons: that the lot coverage and increase in the side yards will allow for construction of one-story homes with a little bit more floor area to meet the needs of home builders and purchasers, and it maintains compatibility at the same time with existing and future residential development. The dwellings will continue to meet or exceed minimum requirements for front and rear yards, minimum landscaped open space, and outdoor amenity area on the lots. Updated stormwater drainage plans and design calculations have been prepared and have been accepted by the city, and there are no concerns based on that review regarding the impact on existing and future drainage and grading patterns or on the design capacity of the storm sewer system. So therefore, the proposed zoning amendment is found to be an efficient use of land and infrastructure and is considered appropriate.
Thanks very much, Mr. Mottram. Any technical questions? Councillor Hopkins?
Yes, quick technical question through you, Madam Chair, to staff about the construction route. I noticed Keynes Road looks like appears to be opening up, and if there's going to be any changes to the construction route. I know there's a number of people that live in this area too, and the challenges of living in a construction area is always challenging, but if you could add a little bit more, if there are going to be different routes opening up.
The public road access is currently available now. It has opened up at the intersection of Oxford Street West and Keynes Road. This is a limited access with the rights in, rights out, so it does provide for construction access. The designated construction access for the entire Phase 2 subdivision was always intended to be Linkway Boulevard at West Elborn. That is now also opened up, and the contractors and the sub-trades have been instructed by Norquay to use those routes. They're not to use a cut-through route through the Keynes Road through the Phase 1 subdivision.
Thank you for that clarification.
Any other technical questions? No. To the applicant, do you wish to speak, or are you good with the staff recommendation? Oh, go ahead to the microphone. If you could state your name and if you're comfortable, your address. And you'll have 5 minutes max.
Press the button. I'm Colin McClure. I work for Norquay Developments. I made this application on behalf of West Keynes Land Corp. Our address is 300 Wellington Street South. Just wanted to say thank you to staff, and of course I agree with the recommendation and my first zoning bylaw amendment, and Larry was helpful in answering all of my plethora of questions, so thank you very much.
Thank you. So I'll go to members of the public to see if anybody would like to comment on this application. I'm not seeing any indications of interest, so I will go back to committee to close the public participation meeting. Moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Kayabaga. We can vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Any discussion, committee, on this application? Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I might as well go first, as this is another application in Ward 9. So it is a very busy ward with lots of development. And I want to just make a couple comments. I am supportive of this recommendation. I understand that it's, I guess, sorry about that. I'm just trying to follow up with my notes here. I'm supportive of this application for a number of reasons, and I understand this is phase 2, so it's almost completed. I know it's been a long process, and I'm sure everyone's looking forward to the completion of this development. The lots that we're talking about are a number of lots. I had concerns at the beginning with about 4 of the lots as they abut the resident that is off Oxford. And I have been working with this resident for probably over 5 years with the challenges in this area, starting with the Trip C even, and the water and the management of all that, and now this development. And it has been a concern not only for Whittington Camp, but for the resident. And I want to make a couple comments. First of all, to be supportive of this, because I don't think there is going to be any aggravating situation to the existing resident in the area. I do want to make a couple comments, though, and that is that the resident of Oxford has been experiencing some issues. And I want to acknowledge not only Norquay or the developer, but also staff for the work that they've been doing with the resident. I know there's a number of issues outstanding, and I think that has to be acknowledged. I think it's been a long journey, and it has been there's been a lot of cooperation, and I think it only exists when you have everyone working together through the frustration of changes in the area and development. And as we move forward, I know there's going to be sort of a monitoring process with Trip C. So hopefully that will be taken care of as we deal with the water in this area and what will happen. But I think it's really important to point out the work that the developer and staff have done with the community. It's important, and I just want to thank you for that.
Any other discussion? Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll do my perennial little part about seeking leave for increased lot coverage. But I've used to vote against these just because we had some clear rules within the zone, and it just seemed more a matter of course to routinely ask for exemptions to the lot coverage piece. Notwithstanding that, I think it's a better use of land, or lot coverage to have more density where we can. But the other side of that is the thing that's driving it is the desire for single story residential rather than using 2-story, which would use less of the footprint of that property and the lots. Not to belabor that, I guess. More, I think the question is that when I've asked before, said that this was something under contemplation for updating that would reflect more modern standards to allow up to 45% lot coverage on a more routine basis in R1 residential lots. Is this something that we would be looking at through the rethink zoning process to look at through the future?
Through you, Madam Chair, it's definitely something we'll be looking at through rethink zoning. We definitely take the councillor's point and the concern about single story versus 2-story. We're also mindful too, with an aging population, there's more of a demand for single story homes as well too. So trying to meet those needs as we go along while trying to still receive the same benefit of that kind of house as well. So we'll definitely be taking a look at this.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess the point of the question was more just to say, is that the process that we would be looking at it through? And it looks like that's the next opportunity, I would imagine.
Through you, Madam Chair, my apologies, my mind just caught up with me too. One of the reasons why we will be looking at it through rethink zoning as well, our stormwater folks have been indicating some concerns about small lot singles in particular with expanded lot coverage as well, and how that impacts stormwater between the homes. So that's why it's definitely going to be on the agenda for us to be looking at in the future. Not an issue here, but an issue for some other subdivisions. So it's on our agenda.
Very good. That's helpful. And yeah, I think in the meantime, we're just going to continue to see the applications for leave from the lot coverage calculations. Fair enough. So, thanks.
Any other discussion? Do I have a mover? Councillor Hopkins moving the staff recommendation, seconded by Councillor Turner. And we can vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Moving right along, item 3.7 is a public participation meeting regarding the Hamilton Road Corridor Planning Study. I need a mover to open that PPM. Moved by Councillor Kayabaga, seconded by Councillor Turner.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
And we will have a staff presentation on this item. Welcome, Ms. Knierim. Go ahead.
Perfect, thank you. Let's turn this on. Here we go. Okay, so this item is the Hamilton Road Corridor Planning Study. So it's a planning study we started back in the spring to help implement some of the recommendations from the Hamilton Road Community Improvement Plan. So the Hamilton Road Community Improvement Plan was adopted by City Council in spring of 2018 to help guide redevelopment along the Hamilton Road area. So this study is dealing with implementing 4 of those recommendations. So we need to change the official plan and the zoning to make this happen. So some of the 4 recommendations that we were looking at through this were lowering parking requirements, reducing building setback requirements, because right now there were some challenges. Another was allowing for more uses, because there are a variety of different zones along the corridor. While they permit many uses, it's not consistent, and then there's also certain uses, such as apartment buildings, that aren't among the range of permitted uses in certain sites. Also making it easier to join and combine certain properties. So the idea is a lot of these properties along Hamilton Road are very shallow, and making it so that if someone wanted to purchase the property behind them to expand their building, add some parking, what have you, right now they'd have to go through an official plan and or zoning amendment, which can be a costly and lengthy process. So the recommendation was to look at that. So right now, the existing zoning along the Hamilton Road corridor is varied. We've got some residential R8 zoning allowing for low-rise apartments. We've got some arterial commercial zoning allowing for some commercial uses up to approximately 3 stories in height. We've got some neighborhood facilities uses. And we also have some convenience commercial and light industrial uses also throughout the corridor. So in the London plan, the corridor is a Main Street commercial corridor from about Bathurst up to Rectory, and then from Egerton to Highbury, it is urban corridor. So that allows for heights between 2 and 6 stories, up to 8 with bonusing, and then you also have the Main Street the Main Street place type between Rectory and Egerton, allowing for developments in height between 2 and 4 up to 6 with bonusing. So these all allow for a wide range of uses and primarily focusing on sort of commercial and residential uses. Then we also, on the 1989 official plan, most of it is in that Main Street commercial corridor, but we also have some properties in the study area that are in the light industrial and neighborhood or low density residential designations. So we've had a series of engagement initiatives. We've had meetings with the BIA. We've had 2 community information meetings. And then we've also had some office hours where I went to the Crouch Branch Library and people could come in and ask me about the study. We did door-to-door engagement along Hamilton Road with different business owners, and we had a Get Involved website. So the proposed changes are essentially intended to make it easier for people to use properties along Hamilton Road. So we've divided it into areas 1, 2, 3, and 4, and different amendments applied to those different areas. So in Area 1, the recommended amendment is a BDC special provision with a height of 13 meters. So this would allow for a wider range of commercial and residential uses. It would require, and we're also proposing to reduce the parking in all these different areas from a parking standard 2 or 3 to a parking standard 1. This allows for, if you've got a vacant building, it to be reused without needing to add additional parking if the use has changed. And then in behind these properties, we've got Area 3. So what's proposed here is that you could keep your existing zoning, which is in almost all cases residential R2 zone, so it would allow for some low-rise residential uses, but then you would also be allowed to have, have a compound zone and also have a BDC zone, so that if you were joined with one of those properties in Area 1, if they were to purchase the property behind them, they could sort of use that whole property to redevelop rather than have to come in for a zoning bylaw amendment. So areas 1 and Area 3, these apply to the urban corridor portion and the property in behind, which the London Plan allows us to interpret as urban corridor. Then in between sort of Rectory and Egerton, we have Area 2 and Area 3. So this is the Main Street place type. So the intention here is that we really want to make sure that we still have these sort of this commercial Main Street. And so I'll also get in a little bit later. We have certain design specifications that apply to all of these areas. Also help to try and make this amendment fit and really maintain this commercial Main Street in this particular portion. So it allows for a wider range of commercial and residential uses, but it requires you to have commercial and service uses on the ground floor. On the Hamilton Road frontage. Buildings could be up to 4 stories in height, and again, you would have that reduction in parking. Similarly, in Area 4, this is the properties in behind here, so there'd be no change to what's allowed, but unless you were joined with one of those properties in the Area 2, in which case you could use that BDC zoning. So then we've also got a series of certain other sort of urban design features that we've secured in the zoning, including a step back of 3 meters above 3 stories in height. So the proposed zoning has a height of 13 meters, which would allow for a 4-story building. And so the idea is that you could go up 3 stories and then you could go back 3 meters, and this would help to make it so that it's perceived as a 3-story building when you're walking along Hamilton Road. Also, if you are, so the parking would need to be behind or beside the building, and also, in order to sort of have that Main Street feel between Rectory and Egerton, if you are on the ground floor, you'd be required to have windows or other openings for 60% of the ground floor. So we're actually proposing to add a definition to the zoning bylaw for what we call facade openings to make that happen. And also, in all instances, the main entrance for the new buildings would have to be on Hamilton Road. So that prevents, say, you purchasing the building behind you and having sort of that commercial creep into the more established neighborhoods. It's all still fronting on Hamilton Road. So all these changes would work together to help revitalize the Hamilton Road corridor, making it easier for people to use properties, and also really helping to make the zoning match with the London Plan vision for these sites. So we also have some other reviews underway to sort of help to make it easier for people to use their properties and have less requirements for landowners who are seeking to use sites. So one is we're having a heritage impact assessment that's looking at the whole Hamilton Road corridor, and that'll help us to give a better understanding of sort of what resources we have in that area. We're also doing an archaeological assessment, a stage 1, so that will help to give us more detailed information because there's certain areas that have been flagged as having archaeological potential. So this assessment could potentially, would really help to provide a more detailed assessment of where we'd actually need those assessments, so some people may not need to do them anymore. We're also having a broader look at the right-of-way width on Hamilton Road because right now a lot of the buildings are built up to the property lines, and then there are certain road widening requirements. So it's looking, we're having a broader look at if those can be reduced. So the recommendation is we're recommending to add a specific policy area to the 1989 official plan. So this is to make it so that All those properties that are in the light industrial, the low-density residential, and the Main Street commercial corridor, the various designations could all sort of be interpreted as having the same sorts of permissions you'd have on the Main Street commercial corridor to allow these changes to happen. And then we're also proposing to amend the London plan, and in this case, it's because along the urban corridor, you can sort of interpret some of the properties being in behind as being in the urban corridor, but in the Main Street place type between Rectory and Egerton, that Main Street place type boundary is more fixed, and that's not the case. So we're basically proposing to allow for some interpretation so that if people buy those properties in behind, they can all be joined together. And then we're proposing to amend the zoning, as I discussed, for that increased range of permitted uses, increase in height, and making it easier to combine those lots with certain design elements to make sure things fit. Similarly, we're proposing to reduce the parking standard to parking standard area 1 because we're getting a lot of variances for parking, so this helps to make it easier, and it's also on a major bus route. And then we're also proposing to add the definition for facade openings to really help us to make sure that Main Street stays a Main Street.
Thanks. Thank you. And Ms. O'Hagan, I believe you wanted to speak. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to provide a little bit of context for one of the bylaws. So while the report and the policy intent in the urban corridor section, so area 1 and 3, is to permit but not require commercial on the ground floor of those buildings, I understand the bylaw itself is not as clear on that, so we would be looking to do a very minor revision to the bylaw before it comes to council to clarify that the intent is to also allow standalone residential apartment buildings.
Thank you. Any technical questions from committee? Okay. Any members of the public wish to speak to this item? Step forward, come to the microphone, state your name and your address, and you will have 5 minutes to address the committee.
Jim O'Connor, 10 Hyatt Avenue. We believe it is more important and logical to preserve the pleasant industrial or the pleasant residential and well-planned historic street than it is to expand an industrial area. Jim Hyatt and Company planned and built this enduring and adequate residential street around the turn of the century. We believe that the configuration of the lots and buildings should conform to what has endured and survived here for more than a century. Thus, we object to the destruction of our street by having part of it attached to one planning area and another part of it attached to a different planning area. This maneuver would destroy our street. We object to the destruction of our street by this maneuver. When our house was built in 1904, there were few autos used and needed parking. Now there's a tremendous number of cars in this area and passing through the area, so we need more parking, not less. Thus, we oppose the planning of less parking in the area. There is presently a shortage of parking places, and we oppose a reduction in parking requirements, which would make a bad problem worse. We believe the existing smaller plots are more appropriate for a residential area. Thus, we are opposed to making it easier to combine lots to create large parcels. We are being asked to approve 4-story buildings or higher without knowing exactly what they will be used for in this residential area. Some possible uses could be detrimental to others in the area. This brings up the question, should those harmed be compensated and how?
Thank you, Mr. O'Connor. Come to the mic, state your name and address, and then you have 5 minutes.
Hi, Chris Haldane, Area 4. I come here today representing Ormsby Street. Back in May, Councillor Michael Van Holst explained in one of the meetings that Ormsby Street wouldn't be affected. However, we are all the properties that back onto Hamilton Road, and that's not true. I talked to Michael Van Holst Friday, and he said that they envisioned it being like Wortley Road. Wortley Road doesn't have over 20,000 cars going down it. It dead ends into York. It dead ends into many, many stop signs before it gets into Commissioners. There's ample parking. There's a grocery store there. Everybody can walk and use the small businesses. We don't know what kind of businesses are going to go in here. The city planner was talking about the frontage looking like 3-story. I'll be backing on to 4 stories if there's something there. Currently, I back on to 3 residential properties, and there is businesses on our block, which is about half and half on Hamilton Road, that are businesses. Most of them are 1 story. There's many, many rentals. And also what the planner said wasn't true. There will be access to the back. There's currently access to the Playtime Cafe further down towards the Rectory. People park there. It affects the neighbors there. These are houses that are still up and coming, that are turning over and over. They're many people's first-time houses. They're many people's, houses that they finish with. The cycle is over and over and over. And with the housing crisis, if a lot of these get, pushed over and developed, a lot of people are going to be out. There's a lot of duplexes down Egerton. There's duplexes down across from the Tim Hortons, down Hamilton Road. This housing is needed. If there's apartments that are coming in 5 years, the rent's not going to be the same. There's not going to be the same parking. Carrying the existing reduced parking, which serves our neighborhood needs now, will negatively affect in the future growth and development surrounding residential neighbors in the future. We currently have a parking bylaw that suits the present needs, but will not be good for the future development. We don't know if it's going to be bars or medical centers or 3-4-story walk-ups. Could be, the way the developers develop now, they put the bottom basement half in the ground. So if you look at the developments like across from Pete's Sports, there's a 4-story there that towers over a 1-story house right beside that was all family at one point. And that's across from the barracks and Pete's Sports. What kind of development are you guys looking for? It's not specified. It's such a broad rezoning, and all the properties are unique. My neighbor at the end, his backyard's about 30 feet, where the last neighbor, he'll have over 100 feet. If you have a 4-story apartment that's behind the first neighbor, how is that fair? They're towering over the 1-story house with a 30-foot backyard. They'll never see the sun again. You'll never have a garden. Your kids will play in darkness. It's not a fun area. I've got a young family. I've got a young family next to me. On the other side, I have seniors, and they've got a 4-year-old daughter that comes over and plays on the weekend and stays frequently. They look after her a lot. Their son still stays. Her father still stays at home. People are staying in the area longer. They really need the way it is to be preserved and developed accordingly. Office space is great. We want small business. We want the businesses to do well. Having parking lots in the back to the side it's inviting more problems. There's going to be more homeless looking for places, more dumpsters, more machines come. Can you imagine having a waste management machine coming right beside your house at whatever time in the morning to pick up the bin, to dump the recycling or garbage, because there's a 4-story walk-up now that's right beside you, 2 properties front to back. People will move out of the area. It'll make it really hard on your property values. It's going to make it even harder if you want to move on, if you don't want to stay there for the rest of your life. I most likely will be. We live in an affordable area. most
You
of
have
the
30
residents, when we
30
moved-
seconds left, sir.
when we moved in, were retired. A lot of them are still there. Everybody I've talked to on Ormsby Street has signed and put their address. They oppose the reduction in parking requirements, increasing the maximum building height behind them to 13 meters, and combining lots front to back. Not so much side to side, but front to back. That will really affect the street across and our neighbors across. They're gonna have lights shining in their windows from people going in and out. We don't wanna divide our block. We want proper zoning block by block. Each block is unique. Some are shallow, some are longer, but
You're at your
most are
5
on an
minutes,
angle.
sir. You're at your 5 minutes.
Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you very much. Come forward, there are 2 microphones over there, and I'll go over to this side next to see if there's anybody here that wishes to speak, but please state your name and your address, and you'll have 5 minutes.
Hi, my name's Stan Goss. I live at 762 Little Hill Street. If you look at item 4 on the young lady's presentation, you'll see that our street is completely blanked out on the mapping, but it's there on the one picture. This gentleman lives on Hyatt Ave, which runs off Little Hill Street. It's a very short street. Try and use our street on Friday afternoons when the mosque has their thing. Try and use Hamilton Road at Increment Street when Tim Hortons has its morning rush where everybody has to get their fix. These are some of the places where you want to reduce the parking. These are places where parking should be more required in our neighborhood. Secondly, the door-to-door investigation that the city did was all on Hamilton Road, which is not even 50% of the area that's affected. It's fine to run along Hamilton Road where it's mainly businesses or rentals at this point, knocking on the doors. But what about places like my street, Little Hill Street, Inkerman, Little Gray, which is totally off the map on your pictures, right? These are all streets that are going to be affected by this reduced parking. We have an example, the corner of Little Hill Street and Hamilton Road. We have our beautiful, which was once a variety store. Then just before marijuana became legal, it was a beautiful drive-through for illegal drugs. We can't get them to clean it up. Mr. Von Holst has had calls from my wife on Mother's Day at 6 o'clock in the morning because we couldn't walk down the street for garbage. It was all over they just throw it out the window. Literally, they were throwing in a building that was condemned. They were living there, throwing it out. And now you want to make more of these industrial buildings, taking up the back streets, cutting us off? It doesn't seem realistic to me. Now, I know eventually progress will bring bigger buildings and there will be reduced homes in our neighborhood. But I don't see why our neighborhood has to be set up to be like this when nobody's come around to us. I mean, it's like I say, it's fine going down Hamilton Road, knocking on a few doors, but what about the houses that are behind where you want to tear down and build these new buildings? I know this is not a year plan or nothing. I understand that, right? But I'm looking at some of the little streets like Steadwell Street, Ormsby Street, when you go along, Little Gray Street. Little Simcoe's not affected because it's all industrial down the north side anyways, and I think they're down to 3 homes on the whole street. But there is the building, the assisted living building along there. I mean, all this has to be factored in rather than just going down the street and saying, well, we went along the street and there was a few houses on the street or a few homes and they thought it was a good idea. I think we should look further. I think we should look at what the cost is down the road for the homes that are backing on these streets. I know because I've been to some of these meetings before and we're looking at building I forget what, infrastructure build-up stuff, and that's great. But we also have to worry about the kids that are going to Trafalgar and Aberdeen. You make more of these traffic or reduced parking areas where you're going to have more traffic on the street. We've got kids going to school for 9 o'clock in the morning, coming home at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and already if you go, and I think some of the times when I'm listening to this, the planners never come out and actually look at the street. Come and stand at the corner of Adelaide and Hamilton Road and watch as there's 5 lanes there, as the traffic guard's trying to get the kids across the street safely. You build more, less parking. I mean, and that's a corner where there's parking for every business that's there, already has good parking. The Sonny's Variety has parking for 4. The Daisy Mart parking has parking for 18 cars. The new Med Center has parking for 12 cars. Stu Craft's Auto has parking for over 20 cars. International Bakery has parking for 20 cars. And yet, even there, it's crowded. You take that at Increment Street and you start building four-story walk-ups there or four-story buildings. Where are you going to put these cars? It's fine to say, well, we'll let them park on the street. But there is no parking on the street, right? Like I say, come out and look at the street during the times of operation. Tim Hortons in the morning, it backs up from Increment Street, some mornings almost to halfway between Mamelon Street and Redan Street with people trying to turn in to get a coffee. I just don't see where there's been a lot of foresight or forethought for this type of application when you're going to reduce parking.
You have about 20 seconds left.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anybody over here that wishes to speak to this issue? Anybody else? Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Leslie Martel. I live at 142 Drini Avenue. And, pardon? Okay. I live at 142 Drini Avenue. It's Leslie Martel. All I want to say is I agree with everybody else that is what they've been saying. The area that I live is just like a little, it's a homey area. There's people, I know my neighbors, we all interact. You start bringing things in that will interfere into our neighborhood. I think it needs to be looked at a lot further before you do it. I know the gentleman mentioned that cleaning up Hamilton Road. I think that would be a big start. It costs money, I understand, and maybe a lot of people don't have the money, the landlords and things, but it needs to be cleaned up. It's kind of grungy walking down Hamilton Road, so that might be a place to start, and maybe things will blossom from there. But four-story walk-ups isn't going to be the answer, and I don't go to Tim Hortons in the morning because it's scary. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Martel. Come forward. There's 2 mics. State your name.
Hi there. My name is Andrea Johnson. I live at 36 Pegler. I am directly behind 487 Hamilton Road, which is the Mobile gas station. When I purchased the property 3 years ago, it was adjacent to Bart's Used Cars, which was open for 8 hours a day, 6 days a week. I am now next to a 24-hour gas and convenience store. This is in an area that has chronic issues with street prostitution, drug dealing, petty crime, and drug houses. Now, I think it's really great that this area of Hamilton Road will be redeveloped. I think that's a really positive thing for residents. However, as a resident who is adjacent to a commercial entity, there's nothing in the bylaws or city code which protects me. There are no light pollution bylaws in the City of London. So as a consequence, the gas station next to me, because Bart's Used Cars had previously sold gas with 2 small pumps, there's now 6 pumps, there's a large canopy, and there's excessive lighting. Because the building was renovated, it wasn't a new development, they were exempt from any kind of site plan review. As a result, half of my house is flooded with light from dusk until dawn. There's issues with garbage, there's issues with noise, there's issues with traffic, there's issues with this being a 24-hour business in this area becomes a plausible deniability for the Johns and drug buyers in the area. It's a real problem. Another issue, which unfortunately is not even part of the city jurisdiction, is that when the gas station was renovated, the vent pipes for the gas station were moved to a location that had been by my industrial neighbor, which is Enerzone at 22 Pegler. It had been by their parking lot. So the vent pipes for the gas station are now 4 feet from my property line. And I have had numerous infiltrations of gasoline vapors into my house, even with the doors and windows closed. And I have been in contact with the TSSA. I've been in contact with the Ministry of Environment. I've been in contact with all levels of municipal and federal and provincial government, and everyone defers to the TSSA. Now, I think that developing Hamilton Road so that it's a better community and it makes it should raise everyone's property values and pleasure in their neighborhood to have a functional, more attractive, safer, and better area to live. However, This development should not have a negative impact on the residences that are adjacent to commercial property. I have no recourse. At this point, the actions of my neighbor have created a serious defect that I cannot remedy. And it is so bad that since the gas station has been opened, I've had 5 cats that have become acutely ill, 3 of which have been so sick that I've had to euthanize them. And this has never happened in my life, 30 years of having cats. I just want to speak up and say that, again, residential neighbors who are adjacent to commercial or industrial properties require the same protection. I should have the same rights as a resident anywhere. At this point, the City of London prohibits smoking within 9 meters of the openings of recreational buildings or municipal buildings, but there's not even code to prevent my neighbor from polluting my airspace within my own home. There needs to be some remedies and some updates and some scrutiny about things like grandfathering in old businesses that should no longer be in residential neighborhoods. I understand this is a real smorgasbord of complaint, but these are the issues that I've been personally experiencing, that, you know, there's nothing on the books, there's no laws that can prevent those lights from shining in my windows for, you know, from 5 at night until 7 in the morning during the winter. This needs to be better. This plan needs to make it better for everyone, not just businesses. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. So generally, the rules of decorum for a public participation meeting are no cheering or booing. And this because there may be, I don't think it's the case in this situation, but there may be a situation where people have opposing views. So we don't want to have any kind of conflict there where people are intimidated from stating their point of view. And that's why the rules are the way they are. But I recognize that you're being fairly restrained, and I appreciate that. Anybody else would like to comment? Please come to the microphone, state your name and your address, and you will have 5 minutes.
Yeah. Hi, good evening. My name is Shahid.
Can you speak directly into the microphone?
Oh, yeah. My name is Shahid, and 1 year before I bought home in 976 Omspace Street, and I will really oppose about the construction of the building, which is the plan has been proposed. And I think that it will be a great mess for all the residents of in a peaceful street. And ultimately, if 30 to 40 apartments will be constructed in that area, and a lot of people will come in that surrounding, and ultimately undue car parking problems will start. And in front of my home, there will be a less space and more traffic, and most of the houses in my neighbors having the kids and children. And ultimately, if such type of huge building will come over here, and it will create a lot of problem for every family. And this is not making ease by constructing the constructing the building. In fact, it is making a problem for everyone in the surrounding neighborhood. Thanks, sir.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Come forward, sir.
I can't give it to him or I'll start swearing, and I don't want to do that. I have almost 500 calls to the City of London with complaints over the years. I'm not sure why everybody's surprised about all the complaints you're getting. Hamilton Road does not need more people. I do understand that we need to clean up some of the buildings. I actually live on Little Hill Street, 770 Little Hill. Mr. Van Hulst doesn't even answer my calls anymore, although I vote for him because he's sick of hearing from me. I was also the one that reported the grow up. You got landlords, absentee landlords. So to have these buildings built 4 stories high, now overlooking our homes, is ridiculous. You've driven all the hookers out of Dundas Street over there. At least twice a week have to wait 5 minutes to get around the hookers on Hamilton Road to go to work. You've got the building at the end of Little Hill Street in the old Hub Variety, which was right across from the church. United Church, Hyatt Ave United Church, is a disaster, an absolute disaster, and nothing has been done. They have been burned down twice and rebuilt without permits, and I know that for a fact. You know, you've let standards go horribly. So increasing people, you move the coffee house from Dundas over there, but the police don't come. They take their time. But you've never given anything. It's like moving your free injection site somewhere. You might as well put it on a Hamilton Road and just tell them to do whatever they steal. They steal our central air units, the crackheads. So I am in favor of Hamilton Road being redone.
Excuse me, sir. Go ahead, Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My apologies, sir. If I could just ask that that we refer to people with the most respectful tone. Terms like crackhead, not appropriate for this chamber.
Well, my apologies. I'm just trying to be basic. Sorry. Anyhow, it's pretty bad there. Your central units disappear. We know, I've even reported to the police where they sell them, right near the Adelaide Street overpass. We have a business there that takes scrap in because you can't go to Zubik's anymore without a driver's license on a car, like a plate on a car, but nobody does nothing. You can see the scrappers with their, and they're called scrappers. It's not, they have a bicycle with a cart behind them. But we don't need more people along that corridor, and you don't need these big buildings that overlook the residential homes behind. You need to actually just clean it up. And people will develop a lot of those properties, but when they don't have windows, they don't have anything. You know, the garbage is all, go to Hamilton Road and Little Hill Street with the building there, the Hyatt Ave Church in the corner, and take a look today, right today, and you'd be shocked. You can't trust the city to maintain any standards. And I could go on for hours, but I'll get all upset and start screaming. And I have lived there, and I've owned the house since 1952. I'm the fourth generation to own it. So
Can we get your name, sir?
my name's Rick Salhani. We purchased the home in 1952. And on Little Hill Street, almost 70% of the people are all family people that owned it. And I like the area. I own 8 houses. I can afford to live somewhere else. I choose to live there. But when you don't do anything about decrepitating buildings and stuff like that, who's going to build what there? Businesses won't come, not until you clean it up. So.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else? Are there any other members of the public who would like to comment on this? Yes, there's a microphone right there, sir. State your name and your address, and you'll have 5 minutes.
My name's Brian Lacey. I live at 829 Steadwell Street. I just sum up by saying I agree with what most people have said here tonight. A real problem with drugs and prostitution in the area. And I'm very much against the 4-story walk-ups. I'm just on the south side of Hamilton Road, and as it is right now, I have half my day blocked by a tall building near me. I really wouldn't want to have the rest of the sunlight wiped out. That's about all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else? Yes? State your name, you have 5 minutes.
Hi. Whoops. Whoops. Okay. I live at 821 Steadwell, which is just right at the corner, sort of the corner of Hamilton Road and Rectory. And there's a building behind me that he's built to the property line, and he has tenants in there. And if I said what I thought of them, I'd likely be criticized, so I won't. But I find drug paraphernalia in my backyard. They use the window that overlooks my backyard as their back door and go constantly through my backyard. I'm afraid to go into my backyard. My niece, who lives with me, and her daughter are afraid to go into the backyard. It's just And the garbage, they throw the garbage out into my backyard. And it's just not right. This has been the family home. My mother, who died a couple of years ago at 102, went to high school from this house. So it's been the family home for over 80 years. And the neighborhood used to be nice. Now it's trash. And like, I don't want to see any more housing, like putting people in that are like the people that are back there. Because, like, I've confronted people in my backyard before. I've called the police and tried to have them charged with trespassing and was told that it's kind of pointless because they have nothing, so they'll just get a ticket that they'll tear up and nothing will be done. So I am fed up and disgusted with the area after living in that area for 80 years, the family.
Can we get your name, ma'am? Can we get your name, please?
Bonnie Robinson.
Thank you, Ms. Robinson. Any other members of the public who would like to speak? Anyone else? Yes? Go ahead, ma'am.
I've lived on Hamilton Road for 45 years. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, can we get your name too, please?
Jane Dearmo. I've watched a lot of transition over the 45 years. I just don't think we're ready for 3-floor or 4-floor walk-ups. I have to call the city 3-4 times a year to come for my garbage because we live in the area on Hamilton Road between industrial and residential. I think our leaves were there for 5-6 weeks this year, waiting and being rained on and everything. And I agree with these gentlemen. I know what that corner looks like, that V corner. It's the worst corner in the city for garbage and junk. Why doesn't the city enforce their bylaws to get this stuff out of the way? I'm sorry, I'm pretty nervous. We have a builder that's beside us, an owner that's beside us, who has a building on the property line. We have a huge thing of PSBs hanging over on our property. We have spoken to Hydro, we've spoken to everybody. Oh yes, we're gonna get that out of there. It's still hanging there. And one of these days it's gonna fall, and I don't know whether it's empty or whether it's full. I don't know who to go to get the answer from. We've been from this floor to that floor to next door to out at the end of the London and back again, and everybody, oh, you better go here, you better go there. And we've never gotten it resolved in all the years we've been there. I just don't think we need the 3-floor walk-ups. We have a young lady in our area who looks after the prostitutes for us. If they're out on the street or they're hitchhiking or anything, she just yells and screams till she gets rid of them, but of course they come back. And I was a letter carrier, and I'll tell you, 3-floor walk-ups do not do well. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, ma'am. Anybody else? Yes, come, sir, come to the microphone, state your name, your address, and you have 5 minutes.
My name is George Kerrigan. I'm the owner of the East Side Bar and Grill on 750 Hamilton Road. I was born and raised here in London, in Old South. Had an opportunity to pick up a business out in Hamilton Road, formerly JR's Country Parlor, and all the stories that kind of go along with that establishment. It's had a reputation of being a rough and tough and kind of neighborhood. But what I found was you got a lot of people with a lot of pride about their homes and where they live and where their children grow up. So after 12 years, you know, you see this day in, day out. You see all the bad and you see all the good. And I don't, as far as the high rises go, I mean, I have an establishment that I've been thinking maybe I should go higher. But now listening to more people, I'm thinking that's the wrong thing to do. We're fortunate where I am that the women of the evening that maybe we should take a European stab at this thing and get it indoors and get it controlled and get them off the street. And the drug issues are citywide. You know, it's just the nature of the beast, and it's unfortunate whether you're the Old South or West End or East End. The problems are the same. Unfortunately, we along this corridor, you know, which the facade part of it, of the beautification of Ham Road, would be absolutely the best thing that can happen. We have we're unique we're a neighborhood pub. We're a music venue. In 12 years, you know, we were recognized for the first time back in 2017 of being Venue of the Year with the Jack Richardson Music Awards. Accolades for us, you know, pride that came in with it. And the people that frequent us keep us in business, and we police our own, so to speak, there, to be very honest. I don't know what else to say. We definitely need some help there, for sure. I don't think that, you know, people are born and raised and haven't left, or maybe left and always come back. I mean, that's just the way it is. It's very much a residential as much as that front piece is all commercial or mixed matches. You know, it's just unfortunate that there isn't more landlords that would take, you know, do the things they need to do to kind of make it right. So I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any other members of the public who would like to speak? One more time. Any last members like to speak? Okay, so I will go to the committee to close the public participation meeting, moved by Councillor Kayabaga, seconded by Deputy Mayor Helmer. Thank you, everybody, for your thoughts and your comments. I appreciate it. I know that, as this lady said, it's difficult sometimes to come out and speak publicly like this, so we do appreciate you coming here and taking the time.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
So before I go to committee, I just wonder if staff want to address any of the comments that were made. I made a couple of notes here. There was concern about access from behind to the properties on Hamilton Road, and that there may already exist some back access. And I wonder, I know there was talk in the report about a buffer zone to prevent that kind of access from happening. So I wonder how that would fit in with existing access that might be taking place. Somebody also brought up some shadowing issues of if there were taller buildings, what protection might there be for homes in the residential areas from shadowing of taller buildings. And also there was issues of light pollution from businesses that already exist in the area, and do homeowners have any recourse about those kinds of problems with existing businesses. So those were just three. I'm sure you must have taken notes. So if staff want to comment at all about some of the public comments.
So thanks. So through you, Madam Chair. So in terms of, so I'll just go through some of the points you raised. In terms of the access, there's nothing that would prevent properties from being accessed sort of from the side streets to parking in behind. We have added something for those areas 3 and 4. That's if there were to acquire one of the properties that is behind one of the properties fronting Hamilton Road, that you would be required to have a 1 meter sort of a buffer of soft landscaping along the edge, just to help provide some buffer to that existing, to sort of your residential neighbors. Sort of on that, what's being proposed in the bylaw in terms of the permissions isn't all that different than what currently exists on Hamilton Road. A lot of Hamilton Road, it's a variety of different zones. You've got some light industrial that could allow for a height of up to 15 meters, so 5 stories. And that does have a sort of similar rear yard setback requirement. There is some residential R8-4, which you could build up to 13 stories, like 4-story low-rise apartments right now, with similar rear yard setback permissions again. You have an arterial commercial zone. You have that sort of through a lot of Hamilton Road. So that would just, could allow for a variety of commercial uses with a height of 10, in many cases 10 meters. So that would be approximately 3 stories, but there wouldn't be any of those sort of step backs. And the required rear yard setback in that case would be 7.5 meters, which what would be required under the proposed BDC zone if you were to build up to that 13-meter height would be a setback of 7.8 meters. So again, very similar setbacks and heights sort of to what is existing. So in terms of shadow, it's not all that different than what would be allowed right now if people were to go and sort of build their sites to the max. It's not anticipated that in all cases people will be building their sites to the max. The intention of this these amendments is just to add additional flexibility. Because what we're having in a lot of cases is, sometimes someone will buy up the property in behind and want to add some additional parking, or potentially expand their building, or they'll have a vacant building and they'll want to tenant it, but because there's currently no parking on site, because it was an existing use with no parking on site, they want to put in a new use, then they have to come to the city to get an amendment to be able to do that. So a lot of what we're doing is trying to target amendments that inquiries we're getting that are very expensive to these landowners. It'll cost, a zoning bylaw amendment, I believe it's $11,000 plus the cost of your studies and fees. So it's trying to really streamline that for uses that we know line up with what the London Plan envisions for the area, even more so than what the current zoning would allow. And in terms of the issues in terms of site plans, so light is something that is generally looked at when there is a site plan application. I know in the particular instance that was mentioned, there was no requirement for a site plan, but a lot of sort of those items in terms of compatibility are looked at closely through the site plan process, which would be required in many cases in sort of similar situations. So in terms of the site plan, that process would still apply often with these commercial buildings, especially if there was any sort of redevelopment.
Thank you. Committee. Councillor Van Hulst.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I want to thank my constituents for coming out too, as well. I think it's unfortunate that the members along the back streets or the backside of Hamilton Road weren't invited out to the. We didn't knock on those doors to get them out to the original meeting. So some of these issues I think could have been addressed. We do have we've got a petition there. Yes, thank you for putting that together. And of course I would say is that the plan here is, of course, we're attempting to make Hamilton Road better and certainly not worse. Some of the issues, it was noted that one of the items may not have been that clear, and I think there might be the distinction between a reduced parking and reduced parking restrictions that our staff may address. I know that we're not trying to reduce the amount of parking that's available, but some businesses might need 5 parking spots. To open, in order to open a business, you need so many parking spots, but they aren't there. But by reducing the restrictions, it would come down to 3, and the 3 spots are there, and now you'll be able to have that building, that business. And that's happened in one case. There's a building closer to Maitland that is hoping to open, but they can't do it. And the cost is very high. It's the $11,000 or $12,000 for the amendment, the fees, and in some cases, an archaeological assessment, which we're providing as well. So the purpose of this is to really make it less expensive for the owners to do something different. Now, what happens, that's another issue, but this is going to have a great effect in terms of making it easy for businesses to open up. Now, our council has provided a lot of support previously in this, and you'll be excited to know we do have a bunch of new businesses on Hamilton Road and some exciting new things. We've got a yoga studio, a bike shop, pet store, a candy store, new bakery. We've got some restaurants. So things are opening up, but unfortunately, the zoning as it is now, if we don't change it, prevents some things. I've got somebody who wants to open a music store, which I think would be wonderful. However, they can't do it until we make this changes going to the BDC. So that will allow that kind of thing.
Sir, the public participation portion is closed now, so it's for council or the committee to discuss this. So I would appreciate if you, Councillor Van Holst, are you can you finish?
Oh.
Whenever.
Sure.
You have time. I'm not trying to rush you along.
Yes, thank you. The 3 and 4 stories, of course, 3 stories is possible here. And what staff has suggested is that 4 stories would be possible as long as there's a setback. And of course, the shadows for this type of business wouldn't be different than a 3-story. You can imagine a tall person like Councillor Turner would cast a certain shadow much longer than a short person like me, but if he were to stand behind me, you would end up with pretty much the same shadow. So that's the hope there. Let me tell you a story that's made me sad. There was a development planned for the old Rags to Riches building. So, and the old Bank of Montreal. So, developer purchased both of those sites in front of Trafalgar School and planned a triangular building with businesses on the bottom and residences on the top, and it was 3 stories, and then a story, just like they described here, a 4th-story with the setback, and it was beautiful. I would have printed it out to show everybody, but looking at it again would make me cry because they decided not to build it. And the reason was that 4 stories wasn't possible at that time, and they thought, you know, we can make money faster investing in Toronto than we can here. It just takes up the time. So that was scrapped, and they said just put them up for sale. So it's unfortunate that's happened. We're in a time where there's the amount of the margins that can be made off these buildings is important. So being able to build an extra story or even a little part of an extra story with the setback makes the difference between having it be affordable or not. And it also allows for more housing. And so the houses and the housing here will see more eyes on the street. And I think so that's a possibility for making an improvement here. So I'd also like to point out that some people have called me and they said they didn't really like the idea of parking. They might not want a parking lot beside them, but that is a plan for making more parking available. So we're going to need some more parking to make this a little more thriving place. And when it thrives a little better, I think we'll see an improvement in many of those issues that people have talked about and have been there have seen for a long time. So we really are working to to make this better. We're seeing it happening, and this change will make, I believe, a big difference. So those are my comments for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Turner.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So thanks to the community members who came out to talk tonight. I was surprised, frankly, to hear the level of opposition amongst those who were speaking. A couple really interesting quotes came out. A lot of people with a lot of pride about their neighborhood here. That resonated, and that was quite evident. Another one was, we definitely need some help here. That was evident too. The issues that I heard tonight from residents were ones of the current state. These are the issues, the challenges, and the pressures in the neighborhood that are existing right now. And the apprehensions that I heard were concerns that the proposals here might make those worse, that they might create more pressures on the neighborhood. The challenge for us, I think, and the challenge for staff, and Councillor Van Holst has been an incredible champion for the neighborhood in trying to help spur revitalization within, especially within the Hamilton Road corridor, is how do we address those issues and how do we help resolve those issues without supporting and providing opportunities for economic development along the corridor. And if we don't do this, the issues that were raised and identified today are issues that will persist. They will continue and they will get worse. I'm not sure, really, I mean, I know that sounds odd, but if nothing is done, if there's no change, then the current environment continues to move forward. So, not to say that this is the answer, the be-all and the end-all, but what has been, ma'am, please, no, my apologies, but we did spend a...
Please, the public participation portion is over. No, it's not a debate, ma'am. I'm sorry. Please, you have to maintain order in the gallery so that it's now council's turn to discuss.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the challenges for us here are to try and figure out what best and what policy is best to apply. The recommendations that are coming forward from staff are in consultation with existing business owners and prospective business owners and operators that have found impediments to being able to move forward. I heard some parallels drawn between Hamilton Road and Wortley in terms of what are the successful elements that might happen within Wortley Village to be able to help bring that kind of commercial, Main Street commercial district into Hamilton Road area. One of the, in fact, representing Wortley, there's a lot of businesses that have wanted to develop and establish themselves in the Wortley neighborhood that have found themselves with very similar obstacles such as parking restrictions. And when you have a very pedestrian-oriented community, having parking restrictions in place where you need to actually add parking on site becomes a really difficult objective, especially when the buildings are so close to each other. The only way that you achieve the parking needed is to demolish a building adjacent to it so that you can create more parking on site. That is not a great way to build neighborhoods. It's a way to actually remove buildings from the neighborhoods. And the reason why the businesses in Wortley have been able to navigate through that is because they have paid the $11,000 in application fees to navigate through the process to seek leave from the parking requirements for those businesses. Not all business owners and prospective business owners will be able to do that. Wortley, fortunately, is able to command that level of investment, but it's a significant impediment to investment within a neighborhood. So I do have a couple questions, and those really surround the characteristics of the light industrial pieces. The Tim Hortons, for example, was cited as as a concern and a pressure point, and I think an apprehension that other developments would mimic that and mimic the pressures and conditions that the Tim Hortons has placed. Would Tim Hortons, as it stands, with a very small queuing line, with a very tight site plan, with a drive-through, would that be permitted in current zoning and planning frameworks that we have within the City of London? I'm not quite sure that it would. It seems like something that was approved in past framework, but not current to today. I guess it might help. For one, the queuing lane speaker box has a distance separation requirement from an adjacent residential property. That's a new standard that didn't exist at the time that the Tim Hortons on Hamilton Road was passed. So I think just on that own, any of the properties wouldn't allow for drive-throughs within the Hamilton Road corridor in current day zoning.
Through the chair, so the current zoning, it's a mix along Hamilton Road, and a lot of them are arterial commercial zones, so they would allow for kind of a larger format, auto-oriented commercial like a Tim Hortons. I can't speak necessarily to the requirements for separation from the speaker box to residential, but I do know that there are requirements for that. The BDC zone is much more pedestrian oriented, and in this new proposed zoning, you wouldn't have drive-through facilities or auto-oriented uses like that.
Thank you, that's helpful. I think one of the other challenges is the mix of uses along the corridor, and one of the biggest challenges is the light industrial zones along the way, which create situations such as the gas station impacts on adjacent properties. I could certainly appreciate that. Grandfathered or historic rights being conferred on a property are a challenge, and it's really difficult for us to impede or impair those. The question for us and what's being put forward here is how do we address those in ways that make other developments more palatable than the use through the light industrial zone. As such proposals that are being put forward here help create that shift in the environment towards a more commercial district rather than a light industrial district. And I think that helps to address some of those concerns. I'm challenged here. I think having read through the report, at first, just on its first glance, I was wondering if these were reasonable amendments to the street. Having read through the report, having heard the report, I think they are. Having heard from the neighbors and the residents, I can understand the apprehensions. I think if we don't address some of the issues to be able to allow for investment in the neighborhood, then the conditions that exist right now will just perpetuate.
Any other member of committee? Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you, and I want to thank the community for coming out as well. I definitely heard loud and clear that there is definitely pride in this community. I do have a couple questions for you, Madam Chair, to staff about the parking. Just wanting to understand the parking a little bit more. Are we taking parking away from this area?
So through you, Madam Chair, we are not removing parking, but we are reducing the parking requirements. So right now, portions of the area, most of it's in a parking standard area 2, and portions are also in a parking standard area 3. So these parking standard area 3 requires the most parking, 2 the second most parking, 1 the lowest amount of parking. So that's sort of what you see in sort of more of these sort of central areas. So the idea being that one of the big changes is sort of as I've mentioned, is the existing buildings. So under the area parking standard area 2, parking standard area 3, you've got an existing building, historic, as much of Hamilton Road sort of is built from a time period that preceded many of these parking standards. You have say a barber shop that has moved out, and say a bakery wants to move in. Well, even though there's currently no parking on site, you would be required to provide parking, which would mean you either need to purchase one of the properties in behind and go through a rezoning and demolish, what have you, or go and seek an amendment. So it's basically, in a lot of cases, it's trying to sort of really allow what's already there and how the street's already been functioning over a long period of time with buildings that existed prior to a lot of these more modern zoning standards, and sort of recognizing their existing conditions and allowing for greater flexibility for reuse of these buildings.
Thank you for that. So the way I understand the parking situation, it's the parking standards that are changing. It's not the parking itself that's going to change. And thank you for that clarification. I heard from the community that they did have concerns about the removal of parking. So we know that the parking is basically going to remain the way it is. The other question I have is around the heritage assessment and the archaeological assessments to be done, which I understand the cultural heritage part will be coming back to us in the spring of 2020. How will these assessments be incorporated into this plan?
So through you, Madam Chair, in terms of these assessments, what they do is they sort of provide that additional layer. Because right now, when someone comes in for a development application, they still have to come in for a site plan in order to make to sort of do any redevelopments in most cases in this area, especially if it's involving a commercial use or an apartment use. So then what this would do is it provides more information. So it'll tell you, whether or not you're next adjacent to a heritage building, if that's something that needs to be considered, because Heritage Places has identified Hamilton Road as the Hamilton Road area as a potential future HCD. So this helps to kind of kickstart our knowledge of the heritage resources in the area so that there aren't surprises. Similarly, in terms of the archaeological assessment, if someone wants to come in with an application, a lot of this area has been identified as having archaeological potential. So this will help to sort of have a more fine-grained look and really realize where we would need additional archaeological assessments. And it may also clear certain sites as not requiring these assessments. So it helps to streamline it for people when they're doing their site plan. So in terms of the archaeology, it might be one less requirement for them to submit.
Thank you. Do we do this in other areas around the city, these assessments?
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Do you want it?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, we've actually been doing that. We've been looking at areas that have been subject to recent redevelopment applications, proposals. We did an area in Wortley. We've done other areas, Soho, areas south and around the downtown. So we've gone in and done these assessments. As Ms. Canarium said, what it does, it gives us a little bit more clarity on the layer of potential, so we can clarify where, in fact, future assessments may be required as part of a development process.
And I assume it gives greater clarity for anyone wanting to come in and develop in the area. And I know, I'll just make a few comments right now, Madam Chair. I know that there's a concern on how we're going to move forward and a change, but I have heard that we need to do something. I want to mention Councillor Van Holst. I know the past 5 years he's been quite an advocate for the community and to redevelop through the community improvement plan, as well as this as well, is something that I've heard loud and clear, the need to improve in this area. And I've heard it from the public tonight as well. And how we do that moving forward is what we're discussing right here. And for me, not to support the changes going forward, it is really not supporting development in the area, potential development, but also the need to maybe beautify, clean up, all those things that I've heard from the public, the concerns, is something that is part of this. You can't kind of not support something like this and do something over there. I also heard the safety aspect of neighborhoods and having eyes on the street is so important. I'm from Toronto. I go to areas in Toronto that may be very, very sketchy, underdeveloped, but they're safe. I feel safe in them because there's a lot of people, there's a lot of intensification, there's a lot of eyes that keep our communities safer. I heard from staff that there are a lot of our policies and plans that we already have in place. Basically, what we are approving tonight, we're going to create a bit more flexibility in that. But I do think that not doing anything is not going to help and improve the community. I think there'll be challenges that are still going to be needed, but I generally am very supportive of taking a look at this area and how we can move forward.
Anybody else? Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, and through the chair, I want to say a couple of things. One, I am glad that the members of the community came out. I know it's an important issue for them, and I can understand the apprehensions. You know, anytime there's a potential for what could seem like big, large-scale change, I think people get apprehensive. It's almost sort of the default position, and then you combine that with, you know, there's some struggles and issues in the area, and you say, look, this change is going to make things worse, right? And I think I heard that from a number of people. I'm not convinced that that's the case, and I'm just going to speak to why. So I represent the area that's just north of Hamilton Road, you know, just on the other side of the train tracks. And in the early 90s, a similar kind of undertaking was taking place there. So they did a planner's action team. They looked at the neighborhood along the Dundas corridor, and they said, okay, what kind of things can we do from a land use perspective that's going to support revitalization of this corridor over the long term? So, you know, not just in the 90s, but in the 2000s and in the last decade and going into this decade, right? What are the long-term things we could do that would really help? And they made a number of changes back then that started a whole lot of revitalization, which has been really good for the area overall. And we just had a secondary plan, which is a bit more complicated than what we're dealing with here, but for that same area, which was just passed last year. And in that secondary plan for Dundas and King Street, which everyone will be familiar with, buildings can be 12 stories tall all along the south side of Dundas and all along King Street, basically to the Western Fair properties. So all the way along that stretch, they can be 12 stories. They can go up as high as 16 stories. And on the north side of Dundas, they can't be that tall. And so they had them be 4 to 8 stories, right? So it could be as tall as 4, and if it was some bonusing, it could go up to 8. And that backs right onto the residential neighborhood, just like what folks are talking about here. And, you know, I think if that was what was being recommended for Hamilton Road, I think it would be a bit too intense, because there are different areas. There's different kinds of transportation options there. And I think that this kind of low to mid-rise, which is what we're talking about when we're talking about 3 to 4 stories, that's low to mid-rise. That's no high rises at all are being allowed. I think that is the kind of intensification that would support this area for a long time to come. And it will happen slowly. It's not like it's just a switch gets flipped and all of a sudden you're going to have all these 4-story buildings. That won't happen. It'll be a very slow process over time. As people come in with their projects, they propose. I think having the commercial at grade is really important, you know, to at least encourage that sort of thing. Having some residential on top, it just gets more people, more customers, more potential business customers in the area, so they don't have to have a car. They can just walk to the barber shop. You know, they can just jump on the bus and go downtown. So, you know, this is a really cool part of the city. I know there's a lot of struggles, but I think it's a really great neighborhood. I think these kind of changes that will allow for a slightly more intense, that's the direction it needs to go in. And it's not too much too fast. I think it's really saying, look, 3 to 4 stories, that's it, not more than that. And I think that that's going to lead to some good redevelopments. I know why people are concerned, but I think it's going to be really good. I think this kind of intensification is appropriate. I think it's good to do it all at once too, because one of the things that's difficult about the way things are now is that everything is fixed. It's very hard to change anything, even just switching uses, and you have to go in for parking changes and amendments. It's been discussed a number of times, and that's enough to deter people from doing anything. And so you've got the same thing just continuing on, right? And so I think this kind of change is going to be good overall, although I certainly understand why people are concerned and where they're coming from. And there were a number of issues that came up that are not directly related to the zoning changes, especially the adjacency issue at the gas station. I certainly heard you on that, and I think we have to think about how we do those kind of interactions, when it's not a site plan is required, but it is quite a lot of intensification, commercial intensification that's happening. And I don't know have a really good answer for that, but I certainly think something we have to be keeping an eye on, because residential intensification, I think we have a pretty good handle on. Commercial intensification, going from 2 to 6 stations, for example, that's a lot, it's a big change. And I think we're seeing the effects of it right here, so those are my thoughts.
Any other comments? Councillor Van Holst.
If I could make a few more, Madam Chair. So the things that are being proposed here, anyone could have done if they wanted to pay the $12,000 or $15,000. It's a little more now because it's close to the river. This archaeological assessment is needed. It's something new from the province. They're saying check this first. And what I'm very happy staff's been willing to do the initial assessment, because it saves people another $1,000. And down the street, just outside of the CIP, someone wants to expand their garage a little bit, and $5,000 is what they may have to spend to get an archaeologist. So this saves that. So the nice thing about this, if somebody wants to start a business, we can, as the city, just say, okay, good luck. We don't have to say, give us $15,000 and then you can start that. So we've done it for the whole corridor. The changes in the uses are really important, and I'll tell you why. The hub variety was brought up a couple of times. Well, I want you to know that 3.5 years ago, somebody called me and said, hey, I want to move my office in there. We got a company, and this would be a great place for our office, but it's not zoned for an office. It's only zoned for a variety store. And so they would have to spend the $12,000 to have that. So they said, forget it. So there was an opportunity to have somebody else in there, but this stopped it. So that's one of the reasons that I wanted to see these extra uses possible, because now somebody else can move in there. So even that place, a whole bunch of new things are possible there, and maybe we'll get a change in that, because it's that's a horrible looking
I'm sorry,
spot.
you're going to have to keep quiet up there.
Right. So there's some of the things that our zoning and our rules so far have prevented from happening, and this is going to make a change. So I would appreciate the support. I think the reducing the parking requirements, again, that's another thing where somebody would want to open a business. They could do it, but it just means they have to pay another $10,000 for a zoning change or minor variations or all those kinds of costs, where they say, I'll just go somewhere else. But now people will be able to look at a property and say, I'll be able to start my business here, and that'll make a difference to the neighborhood. So thank you. I don't believe it's going to be as bad. We've looked at the worst case scenario, and I don't think it's going to be like that. I think we'll see some very pleasant changes first. So thank you.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions for Ms. Canarium. You mentioned some of the existing allowances. So there are certain areas where 5 stories are currently allowed, 13, I believe, stories in some. Did you say 13 stories, or was it 13 meters? 3 stories currently allowed. So for the 5-story example, will that be coming down then? So 5 stories will not be allowed, and the 3 or 4 will now be allowed, and that's on those sites?
Yeah, so through you, Madam Chair, yeah, so that is the height limit in the light industrial area. So that would be reduced to from 15 meters to 13 meters. So from a perceived height of 5 stories to 4.
And for some of the consolidation, I'm wondering if there have been applications in the past where the idea of consolidation had come up, but I thought you might have mentioned something like that, but they decided not to go that route. Is that true?
Sorry, so through you, Madam Chair, we have had inquiries to that effect, people who have contacted us through the study, expressing that, and through, also brought to our attention through the Councillor's office, that these have been inquiries. I don't believe we had formal applications come in for any of these potential consolidations, but we have heard sort of rumblings that this is something that in certain cases have made it challenging for people.
Were any of the consolidations talking about having that extra property for parking, or was it for a bigger development?
Through Madam Chair, for parking also, just because in order to meet those requirements.
So thank you very much for that. And again, thanks to everybody for coming out. As other councillors have said, when it's presented as a big whole picture, it's difficult. And I know people sometimes come with the assumption that all of this is going to happen all at once. But I'm glad Deputy Mayor Helmer brought up the Old East Village as an example. It's been 20 years that these kinds of new policies were implemented in the Old East Village, and we're seeing tremendous revitalization in that area. They suffered and still continue to suffer many of the same problems that the Hamilton Road area suffers. But what's happening in Old East Village is we're seeing a huge revitalization. The people that live in that area have the same kind of neighborhood pride that, and perhaps even stronger than the Hamilton Road area. They rally around their neighborhood. When there is an issue, whether it's good or whether it's bad, they come out and they fill this gallery whenever there is an issue in the Old East Village. They are very supportive of these new businesses that want to take place in the Old East Village area, because new businesses are good for the area. And when I hear Councillor Van Holst talking about some of the new businesses that have set up already on Hamilton Road, a yoga shop, things like that, those are the kinds of things you want in your neighborhood. And when they talk about eyes on the street, when you have a neighborhood that is challenged, that faces a lot of challenges, it's difficult to attract investment. And then it becomes this sort of perpetuating cycle. When we can do as a city, we can't create jobs and we can't create businesses, but we can set the policies in place that encourage investment in an area like Hamilton Road, that encourage development, the good kind of development, the right kind of development. You do want more people there. You don't necessarily want droves and droves of people moving in and living there, but when you have people visiting a yoga shop, visiting the Portuguese bakery, visiting the businesses in the area, then you have a thriving, vital business district. And when you have people walking your sidewalks and visiting these businesses, it tends to keep the worst kinds of elements out. So if you have empty buildings and empty lots where people don't want to invest in their property, it's definitely going to attract people just loitering there and hanging out and doing unsavory things that you don't want in your neighborhood. When you have a bakery there, a yoga shop, an office building, a medical dental building, then it's attracting customers coming around in and out. There's a lot of activity. They might visit the other businesses in the area, and that becomes a more positive cycle. I understand the concerns about having a tall building, buying a developer buying the property behind and building a tall building there. But as we've seen in Old East Village, there actually hasn't been a huge ton of new buildings being built. What has happened in Old East Village over the years is people buying the old buildings and repurposing them, revitalizing them, refurbishing them, making them better and beautiful, and operating their businesses from those buildings. So I hear the concerns, I hear the worries. This is a plan for a long-term revitalization of the Hamilton Road corridor. Councillor Van Holst has been a champion of this area and of this kind of revitalization since his first day on December 1st, 2014. He has never stopped advocating for the Hamilton Road area to try to take all the tools that we have at our disposal as a city and using them to make this a better place for all of you, for the residents that live there and for all of us that would go and visit there. So again, I thank you all for coming out. If nobody else has any comments or questions, I would look for a motion. Councillor Hopkins, are you moving the staff requirement or
Yes.
recommendation?
I'll
Sorry.
move the staff recommendation.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Turner. If there are no other comments, then we can vote. I just want to point out that Clause C has been updated as per the revised bylaw and
Part D, pursuant to section 3417 of the Planning Act, no further notice be given.
pursuant to section
3417.
3417 of the Planning Act, no further notice is given as amendment relates to permitting, not requiring commercial uses on the ground floor for apartment uses in areas 1 and 3. Thank you, sorry. Just because it's new. Yeah.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Moving to items for direction, 4.1 is the first report of the Advisory Committee on the Environment. Do I have a mover? Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Deputy Mayor Helmer. Any comments? Then we can vote on that.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
So there are no deferred matters. The next two items are confidential items, so I need a motion to go in camera. Moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Kayabaga.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
So we will be going to Committee Room 3, and we will adjourn from there.